Okay, here we are in Whitman Town Hall. Today's Tuesday, April 16th, 2024. It's 7 o'clock. Typo on your agenda today. It was a leftover from our joint meeting. So we're in room 21, second floor. The previous minutes we have before us, which we will, wait till further in the meeting. 32642 to review and approve. Reserve fund stands at $23,500. Public forum, is anyone here to talk about anything that's not on the agenda? Seeing none. So under new business, obviously we're here to talk about the annual town meeting warrant and Article 2. We probably won't cover much old business, just to cover as much of that as we can while we have the opportunity tonight. So communications, we do have a couple, one from the Whitman-Hanson Regional School District on the latest assessment, and one from the Board of Health. Upcoming meetings, so just so you know, I posted tonight for Thursday, 4/18, which is 2 days from today, Monday, 4/22, which is next Monday, and Tuesday, 4/23. So I think we might need all three of those meetings with the amount of, information that we now have, all of the information we need to make recommendations on the warrant. So my hope is that maybe we won't need the Monday meeting, but I'd rather post it and not need it, because I can always cancel it.
Those are still 7 p.m. here?
All 7 p.m.s.
Okay.
Yep, Thursday, Monday, and Tuesday. So just for information, John Noon is on a phone. John, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Very good. And Rosemary will be calling in on another phone. She's in travel mode and probably won't be here for another 15 minutes is what she had said. So that is more or less the agenda for tonight. I'd like just to open the meeting just to say thank you to our town administrator and assistant town administrator and the Board of Selectmen for the work that you've done to get us to this point. There's a huge amount of work that goes into drafting an Article 2, I know. We get it to make recommendations, but to actually put it together is a very big amount of work, so. All right, welcome Rosemary, the meeting is underway.
You're on speaker.
Okay, I'm on speaker and I will continue to be on speaker till I arrive. So.
Okay, very good, thank you. So we're just going over the pre-meeting kind of accolades, I guess, for the work that the town administrator has done. I know she was here through the weekend. I know she was here on the holiday Monday because I was here for a little while as well. So again, the work that we need to do is significant enough that we've added meetings for the Finance Committee. I know, like I said, there are different scenarios on where we can go with this budget. I think it's been made clear. There are a lot of positions, there are a lot of different ideas on how to proceed with this warrant and how to proceed with Article 2. So I just want to try to make it clear that this meeting, I really like to have a real, in-depth discussion, but keeping it in the context of the discussion for the limited amount of time we have. And be respectful for all people's ideas, so as we go forward. So I guess for the first part of the meeting, when I open it up, I think we should talk a little bit about how we got to where we are now, right? So the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen had a joint meeting in March, end of March, to kind of talk about the way we need to move forward with the budget, right? Challenges. We had a significant assessment that we were looking to deal with. Town administrator drafted an Article 2 to reflect the challenges that budget would have made, right? Mm-hmm. So I think the next thing that the Finance Committee received was a notice for a remote Zoom meeting by the Board of Selectmen to approve the warrant article and a ballot question to be added, right? So maybe, Sean, if you don't mind, since you're here, can you walk us through the procedure, I guess, or the steps that were made from when we met jointly to how the board made a decision to move forward with a override specific to the schools?
She's gone.
Well, I think if you back up a little bit to the first meeting that we had in December, Board of Selectmen had a meeting where we had done a revenue projection. We had talked about doing that last year, but this is Mary Beth's first full year of going through a full budget cycle. We wanted to really follow the timeline that we shared with the board, with your board. So we started with the revenue projection, using the 5% of the schools as a placeholder, as opposed to years ago, it used to just be like a flat, level funded until it came back. We put the 5% in based on the Madden report. We did a revenue projection, and it was pretty clear that it was going to be a bleak, pretty bleak outlook. This is going to be a growth year. Mary Beth put together her budget message, and her message went out to the department heads. I think what will happen, hopefully, in further years, is that we'll go through this process once, and they came back really high, and the budget process had to go through itself. But I think that created a little bit of tension. All the department heads coming in relatively high, not in line with her budget message, including the schools, and then it took us some time to get to where we are now. But the override for us, I think, is always kind of implicit in the financial policy and principles that we're following. Anything above 5% for the schools, because of the nature of how big that budget is, has to come with some additional revenue. So maybe that's where...
Okay, that's where we are now. So, also, Mary Beth, you added that if in fact, in subsequent years, if the schools bring in an assessment in excess of 5%, it's just going to be an automatic override for every town meeting.
Honestly, I feel that we have to fund all departments, right? Not just the school, but all the other departments. So just to get us at 5% on the town side, I had to cut them down so bad. I mean, I took off between raising revenue and cutting $1.7 million is what we've cut. I mean, so we are bare bones at 5%. If you look at what we're funding for most of these departments, I looked at where revenue is, I went through all the expenditure reports, and I went through 24 up to the time that I put the budget together. I looked at the 23 expend and 22 expend for every single line item on here. So just because they asked for $1,000 for the past 5 years, if I could only see 800, I gave them 800 because they spent 600. I'm just not even going with, well, we've always had 1,000. Well, guess what? It's sort of a zero budget is what I started with. And so, yes, I feel that if 5% is a stretch. I mean, it's up to 5, and we just said 5 for the schools. That really, really put us in a spot. I mean, but we still have to live within our budget as well. So I went and pared everything back to make that number. Anything over 5, I would like to see an override. Yes.
But that is going to be, so in order for us to make a decision on how we want to see a sustainable budget, those are things that we need to look at too, right?
Right.
What is the intention of the town every year that the school comes in over 5? An automatic?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, that would have to be year by year. But I would like to sort of hold the line here.
Yeah.
So that the towns, what the different departments need. The library wants more. Everybody wants more. Everybody can prove they need more. And then I have to say, sorry, I know you go into the FinCom and you paint this picture and everyone says, advocate for your department and, put in for what you want. And then Mary Beth comes in and slash. So we do need to see some of our departments too have some growth. But really, when you look at this department, this budget, and the TA recommends without an override, they're not getting much, our departments. That I've already scaled back well over $1 million in the budget on our side. So for future years, yes, I would like to sort of follow that, but I'm not the one that makes that decision. That's the Board of Selectmen. And we have to see what the numbers look like each year, where everything comes in on across the way, whether it's the schools and the town, what everyone receives for revenue and so forth.
Okay, so last week you were able to listen to the finance meeting and get a sense, or you haven't listened to it yet?
I tried to listen to it, but I couldn't find a meeting for the 9th.
Right, the dates were wrong?
They uploaded the wrong meeting.
We still have it wrong?
No, they did upload the one from the 2nd. I'm not sure if the one from the 9th is there.
Okay.
But the one that was from the 9th was labeled as April 2nd.
Oh, I should have listened to it. But I will. But I just want to step back for 1 minute when you were asking Sean how it happened that we came here to the vote. So after the school took their vote for the assessment of 11.03, as I was walking out of that meeting, Beth said, Mary Beth, Lisa, I'll be in touch. Your board votes on the, whatever date, whatever we were voting. And actually, I got a call from Carl, who said he received word from Laura Kemet that Beth Stafford had reached out to her and wanted to have a meeting with the 2 chairs and the 2 town administrators, Jeff and Beth. So Beth called that meeting. We met here, and it was right before we met on Zoom. And Jeff presented one of his options, well, the different options that he considered. And he said, this is one of the options that I wanted to put forth. And he said, I think that if we go with that, and Beth said to me, you know, $1 million override is not going to pass. So if we go with this lower override, you know, we're going to have a meeting and see if we can make that happen. And I said, well, I agree with you that, you know, a $509,000 override has a much better chance than $1 million override. So they were successful, and at that meeting, I watched that meeting, everybody there, you know, knew that the vote was contingent upon an override, and the school committee doesn't vote overrides. That's not their purview. It's the Board of Selectmen that puts them through.
When you say everybody knew the vote was contingent on an override, what do you mean who's the everybody?
The school committee that night.
No, that's
Yeah.
not true.
Oh, I watched it, and they all said, what's the
Got
impact?
one-
So, wait,
Not that she agreed with it, but you knew people asked what the impact was. You know, it was discussed, I should say.
Yeah.
Discussed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
okay,
It was
so
discussed.
I think this is an important piece of it, right? Because I think if you
Absolutely.
recall, the Finance Committee has been very vocal about the need for an override, right? We are in agreement with the Board of Selectmen that there is a need for an override, that there is a structural deficiency within our financial future, really, that needs to be addressed, right? So I think maybe as a review, since you didn't have an opportunity to listen to the Finance
No.
Committee meeting of last week, we could kind of walk you through, and like I said, in a way that's not confrontational, but kind of gives you a sense of why we took the vote to not support an override to supplement the assessment, right? I think that's the bottom line, I think, is we came up with quite a roundtable discussion of ideas. And one of them is really the long-term sustainability of the budget, right? You and I have had this conversation. You and I know the challenges that the taxpayer face. And I think we're all in agreement. The problem really isn't here in the town. It's the fact that we have so many unfunded mandates that come from the state level, right? We're not getting the help that we need, all right? So for that, you know, brings us to this impasse, right? I mean, we are at an impasse when we were at the budget process with the school committee to try to get a reasonable assessment that the town could make work, right? So I guess the feeling of the consensus of the entire finance committee the night we took the vote was that we do not support the override to supplement the assessment. That we feel that the school committee voted an assessment and they took some pretty significant steps using, like we did last year, one-time money out of E&D, much the same as we took one-time funds to balance the budget on this side. So to say the first thing that came to my mind is we got to this point where you're meeting with the school committee, there's a budget discussion, school committee votes to drop the assessment from 11.1, and correct me if I'm wrong, to 7.87, was a move towards the town and towards the taxpayers' affordability issue, right? In my mind, that's when the town also needed to move in the same direction towards the school committee. So, but we're going to go around the table. There are many other factors, right, that affected our decision to make the vote that we made. That I may not be making it exactly the way it was talked about. So that's why I'm going to open it up to the rest of the finance committee to talk about other factors that led to your decision. So, start with Rosemary.
So one of the things that we want to see is responsible long-term financing. We have the advice from Madden that says we should be pulling in more revenue, yet we had Article 2, one that we could not review last year that was amended on the floor that pulled back from the levy similar amounts that you are now asking for an override for. Now, if you pull back from the levy almost $500,000, or a little more than $500,000, and then ask the taxpayers to then put that back in. So you didn't collect from taxation the 2.5% last year. You used free cash to supplement that. And I think I sent the committee a more forthcoming presentation done by Plainville for the same amount of the same action. So to pull back from the levy a percentage, you subsidized it with free cash. And you reduced taxation with free cash. That was the article. I've already gone to other towns.
Okay, let me just
Just quickly, I'm not quite done. Thank you
Okay.
so much. Any action that was not done through the assessor's office, that was done as a selectman's request, not part of the proper assessment, it was done outside of the Proposition 2.5 regulations, or it would have been done during the warrant time. So that's Article 42. If you'd like, I can send it to you. I did swing by and drop it off there. We also have another article on the same warrant to do the same thing again without a number. So I find this to be too erratic and not in line with Matten's recommendation to pull in as much revenue as possible.
Okay, so what we're gonna do is, you made that point, right?
Yes,
We're gonna-
and I'm confident that it did pull back.
Okay, so you're talking, and you're classifying it as an underride, is that
But
correct?
it's not done formally and voted for like most towns do, but it does
Have
pull
the
back.
effect.
It pulled back $500,000 from the
Okay.
levy.
Mary Beth?
Okay, because you did stop in last Thursday, I was tied up, but you spoke with Kathy and you said you did an underride last year and an override this year, and that's fiscally irresponsible. It was not an override. An override reduces the levy
It's
for the
an
town.
underride.
That's what an underride
Mary
is.
Beth is gonna talk.
And an override permanently reduces the levy.
Yep.
That's not what was done yet last year. And an override increases the levy permanently. What we did was simply use some free cash to close the gap. It was 300 and something. We had to increase it to 455 to make up the difference from 5% to, I believe, 5.62 was the final number, somewhere around there for the schools. So we had to add more money to close the gap. That's how we closed the additional gap. So that is correct. We did use some money from free cash to close the budget. So I made sure this year that we didn't use any free cash to close this budget.
Okay,
So,
It's
wait a
not
minute,
an
wait a
underride.
minute.
let's read the
Rosemary,
article.
no, you don't have the floor.
Okay.
We're gonna do this systematically. You had one time to make a statement, Mary Beth is gonna answer. What I wanna do is I wanna leave enough time for everybody
Perfect.
to talk about
I don't
what
know
we're
if we're
talking.
talking about the same thing.
Right,
Because
right.
this one is clear. It takes from taxation. It does. It pulled back a percentage. And I did go to other assessors, have it reviewed.
Okay, so
it did pull from taxation.
I think that we need to do more research and forward the information that you forward to the Finance Committee, to
Yep.
the Town Administrator, and to the Board of Selectmen. Sean, do you have some input on that
I
process?
don't know exactly, but I think you're talking about some of the excess levy capacity.
No, we're talking about using free cash. Article 42 for last year, it used free cash to reduce taxation, essentially. So basically, that money could have been collected.
So it's on the warrant this time, is that correct, Mary Beth?
Generally speaking,
That's
Rick,
usually done in the
generally
assessors.
speaking, what we're trying to do, I mean, again, this is Mary Beth's full first budget cycle. You know, Randy was the chair at this time last year, you know what I mean, and he played a major role in the budget process. You know what I mean? So the fact that Mary Beth is here and she's trying to implement policies that are going to get us on better financial ground is really some of the things that we want to clean up. We're not saying everything was done perfectly over the last 5 years at all. You know, we're trying to get better at implementing financial principles and policies that are going to move us into a better direction.
So can you give us specific interpretation of the thing that Rosemary's talking about on last year's warrant?
What was done
No,
imperfectly.
I think if she's saying using free cash in
Well, I
order
can
to
read it.
balance the budget.
I wasn't balancing the budget. It pulled back from taxation for the next year, this year.
I'm
I
not
can
sure.
read it for you if you'd like.
I-
So where would we take that this year? Could we go back and reclaim that levy capacity?
Well, that would have to be an article, but that's not the issue here. The issue is where we did not collect $500,000, and then we see that deficit only in one department. If we've made a mistake, as you've stated, and pulled back from that amount that we're not collecting, why are we only seeing a similar amount pulled from one department? And, I'd like somebody to point out, I read through the Madden's report on that document where it says 5%, and I'm going to say why. I want to say why I worry about this, and why I worry about subverting the sanctity of the school committee vote, which is supposed to be equal, right? Or subverting what it's supposed to do, is that the liabilities fall back on the town. The liabilities for not meeting IEPs. This is a department that holds.
So we're drifting off your
point. My point is, this is not the department you should cut short, because that's where the lawsuits always
Okay,
fall
but
on
you're
the
still
town.
not talking about the same question.
The same
I want to
question.
find
What is the question again, please?
about the action of last.
I sent
Years.
the same
Right.
description. When you use free cash, exactly how they've said it, to reduce taxation, to pull back, when you fill that in, it does pull back from the percentage that you collect. You don't really collect the full 2.5% because you've subsidized some of that with your free cash. So you've subsidized taxation with past taxation, and you're not moving forward at the same time.
So let me just say the way I was explained this article last year.
Yeah, it was
was this, and I'm going to tell you, I may be totally wrong, I maybe was misinformed, but I was told that the reason this article existed was to ensure that we used all of the capacity of the levy. So if there was something left over, this article was going to capture that, and that was going to be an effort not to leave any levy on the table. That was the explanation.
If it went into stabilization, that would be the case. But it did not go into stabilization. It went into reducing the next year's taxation.
Okay, so
that is
that's the
not
part that I don't
So
understand.
I did review this with several towns, other
Okay.
towns. I had them read the article, and
All
this
right,
is what.
so I don't want to spend too much time on this.
So-
It's obviously a very important issue.
Yeah.
It's your number one priority. Does anybody have any other information about it? Kathleen?
No, I know,
Okay.
I have a different,
Okay, so I just want to make sure we exhaust the discussion on that one point, right? And like I said, my interpretation is certainly, or the answer that I was given when I asked this specific question last year is different than your answer. So I think it just needs a better discussion.
I think it does need to read the article. It's quite short. It does need to. It was not approved by the Finance Committee. That means the Finance Committee were never given the total amounts. So we didn't look at it because it didn't have a number. And if it was described as I have had described by 3 different towns after reviewing that, 3 different. One of the things were said was if it was part of that just normal Proposition 2.5 assessment, it wouldn't be brought up by the selectmen. It would be part of the
Pre-warrant discussion?
It wouldn't be on the warrant. It would be part of the taxation. That would already be part of setting the tax rate process.
All right, so I just want to exhaust the discussion on that. And like I said, that might not be the end of the discussion, but I
It
think
won't be.
for the people in the room, there is no other information that anybody else has regarding
Oh,
it.
did you email the?
It did. I
Okay.
sent it to
So
everybody.
everybody can read
It is
that.
difficult, and just understand this, right? We have 3 meetings left to digest. I sent 10 emails in 3 minutes today, right? With all supporting information for what we're trying to discuss tonight. That's difficult, right? For everybody to read all of those emails and digest what's inside them. And the one that you're speaking about, like I said, I'm going to be perfectly honest, it goes above me.
Well, it's very clear. The article says what
But we're
it's doing.
gonna leave it on the table and go to the rest of the reasons why, and let's stick to that. The rest of the reasons why the Finance Committee voted not to support the override. Kathleen, you were next.
okay, so I have a very different take. And it was that I was pleased that the committee, with Jeff's recommendation, voted to cut the school assessment, the school operating assessment by $910,500. And that reminded me of the joint meetings last year. I was in North Carolina, so I wasn't physically here for them, but I've watched them. The schools made the first move. They said, all right, we've got a problem, you've got a problem. We're going to do our best to try to meet you halfway there. So they cut $910,500, leaving $888,000 as a gap between the 5% that Whitman and the 5% that Hanson set aside. You may be under the assumption, because you had the discussions with Jeff and with Mary Beth, Beth, not Mary Beth, Beth, you're Mary Beth. I watched the meeting and I watched the school committee members, and I was not under the impression that the school committee members were saying, yeah, I'll vote to cut the $910,500 and we'll have a proper half override in the two towns to make up the difference. I was not under that impression at all, Mary Beth. So if Beth and Jeff were in your meeting, I'll finish and then I'll let you.
Yeah.
So if Jeff and Beth said something to you, they can't speak for the committee. The committee has to vote. So my impression after that meeting was good for you guys. Then I find out that there's this override approach to filling in the gap, and it's like, wait a second, where's the town's effort to meet in the middle? And I anticipated that the towns would find the funds, as they did last year with free cash, to close the budget gap so that we're not looking at, I'm calling it nickel and diming the taxpayers with a $500,000 override. It's a $95 bill on top of the other bill, on top of the DPW and the Middle School Building Committee and potentially the South Shore Boat Tech, that I think that a $500,000 override diminishes the importance of an override. That an override is for something big, not for a budget, not for an operating budget. And if the town has the funds, has the potential, and has the will, and our will may be different from the Board of Selectmen's will. If the committee has the will to close the budget gap and has the resources to close the budget gap without asking taxpayers for another penny, then that's what we should do.
Okay, so I'm gonna go to Mary Beth. She had her hand up first, and then Sean. But before I get to that, and then go to Elizabeth.
No, I was just applauding.
So what I think needs to, I just want to make clear, right, that this isn't a finance committee against the Board of Selectmen, against the town administrator.
That feels that way right now.
Sometimes you get that. What I'm trying to do is glean out the information that you didn't get because you didn't listen to our meeting, right?
It was posted wrong, but I will listen.
And it wasn't posted wrong by us.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I will listen to it.
Okay, so what were you going to respond to, Kathleen?
Kathleen, what came in over 5% was $1,062,000. What is now over is 509. I'm not sure where you're getting the 900,000.
The school committee voted to reduce its assessment by $910,000, so it reduced the million whatever down to $800,000.
It reduced the $1,062,000.
Yep.
Well, over the 5%.
Yep.
Down to 509.
For Whitman,
For
and
Whitman.
372 for Hanson.
So you're
that's
talking the total.
So that's the 888.
Okay, so for us it's the 509. Yeah, 212. I did watch the meeting. I'm sure I saw the same thing you saw. The impact question was asked, that it was discussed that it was an override, and somebody asked what the impact would be for the taxpayer, so they knew it was an override. And Hillary, I believe it was, said, is the town on board or in agreement with the override? You can play it back and watch that part. And Beth said yes, and she didn't mean the town, she meant the people that met, right? And so she said yes. So override was most certainly part of the discussion when the school committee took their vote. It was absolutely, they talked about impact, they talked about override, they asked the question.
All right, we're going to go to Sean, and then go back.
Okay, thanks.
One of the things that I think that me personally I've been trying to get away from is the negotiation that you're talking about. Years ago, when I was on the finance committee, again, early on Article 2, the schools would be put in as level funded. All the departments would come in on Article 2, and the schools would come in last. And I always thought, well, that's kind of funky. It kind of sets up this weird dynamic. When we had the Madden report, and at least we settled on, I'm not saying everybody agrees on it, but we kind of have settled on this 5%. When the schools go in at 5%, that is 2.5% above, in a sense, other departments. As far as like the budget message that Mary Beth initially sent out, we want to be as tight as possible. We need to be more careful. I think John Noon has talked about like negotiating contracts that are in line with our financial forecast. That's something that I've listened to, I hear loud and clear, and I want to do a better job at that. But we have that 5%. So the schools go in at 5%. So the way that the school administration set up that then sheet was they started at the bottom 5% and at the top 11%. And then you're expecting us to come up to meet in the middle as a compromise, like you said. What we want to do is we want to go away from that process. We want to say the 5% is what we can afford. We don't plan on using any free cash. We stick to those financial principles. We can move forward in a way that's going to keep us on financially stable ground. You can see what's happening in other schools as they move to these shaky ways to compromise. They're moving their institutions into more and more precarious situations. 5% is a significant number. It's already a prioritized budget. Did you happen to send that message I sent to you out to the committee?
Yes,
So
I did. I responded to you as well.
yeah, but the rest of the committee was able to look.
I sent it to the committee, yeah.
Yeah, so that
Everything that comes to me, I sent to the committee, just for the
Thank
record.
you.
Yeah.
I was trying to make that point a little bit, that it's, the school already has a prioritized budget inherent in our financial policy right now. It's at 5%. We put that in there, then that secures that funding for them. It's not ideal. The ESSA money killed them this year as far as pulling back on the ESSA, but if you look at the past 5 years, we on average, we funded them at 6%. Some of those compromises that you're talking about, at 6%. If you look at 6%, 6%, 6%, 6%, 6% over 5 years, as opposed to 5% over 5 years, that begins to balloon the budget inherently beyond what we are what we can sustainably fund. Whereas if we keep it to the 5%, but then we add the revenue with the override, then there's like a correlation. You know, if we're gonna go a little bit above, we're gonna get the extra revenue that's gonna keep sustainably coming. But if we use the one-time funds and use the one-time funds and use the one-time funds, it begins to balloon and run away from us.
Okay.
So I think
Yeah.
maybe speaks to
Until we
the
have good
compromise or
assessment.
not.
So I have two, I have 1, 2, and then you, Rosemary. But before that, I just want to make one point is, I think it's refreshing when you're referring to your history on finance and you talk about being a member of the finance committee. It's nice to know that you still remember what that was like, because it's important to us, right? That the Board of Selectmen is, you know, in tune with this process, still, even though you're a member of the Board of Selectmen. So, but I have always looked at the 5% as tied to the 2.5% when we're listening to the Madden report, right? There are no departments very few departments that are listening to the 2.5%. We haven't seen it, right? So all I'm saying is, yeah, those are good numbers to look at a sustainable budget, to look at projections, to look at, you know, where we should be and not exceed certain thresholds. But the reality is, everyone has to be on board with that process. And I just want to get to Kathleen, and then Dawn, and then Rosemary. Go ahead.
Okay, so, Mary Beth, I agree. There definitely was discussion about override at that meeting. And I held my breath, waiting to hear the motion to do whatever the school committee chose to do. And the school committee moved to reduce their budget by $910,500. There was never a second motion saying, move to make our difference between 5%, so $500,000 for Whitman and $372,000 for Hanson, contingent on an override. So whether there was discussion on the override, and I absolutely agree with you, there was,
Yeah.
but there was no vote, because if there were a vote, I would have gotten in my car and driven up to the school committee meeting. I have reasons why I couldn't be there physically, but I was watching. There was no vote to make their budget, their operating assessment that they've sent to the towns, in their new letter that I have a copy of, contingent on a Proposition 2.5 override.
There was no vote.
Okay, so
But I don't think that matters.
so I wasn't
Okay,
listening
so
with
let me
different
get-
ears, but I was looking for, please don't make that vote, and they didn't.
All right, so I'm going to go to Dawn, and then Rosemary.
Thank you, Chair. I'm only going to speak for myself. At the school committee meeting and as a school committee member, I have the motion right here. Does not include anything about an override, okay? The motion I voted on had nothing to do with an override. It was not contingent on an override. It was to send each town an assessment. And then that goes to town meeting floor. And the voters vote on the assessment. Now, where we stand tonight, if nothing changes, my thought process already goes to, if there's a ballot question for $500,000 for a school override, and that ballot question fails, in my mind, the school budget's rejected, and it comes back to school committee.
That's the process.
Okay? It's not a case that, well, that override failed, and schools, here's your budget. We're funding you at 5%. So I hope that someone in this universe starts to have conversations about the consequences of where it stands right now and what a supposed school override means. In my head, it comes back to school committee. We can reaffirm that same amount if we believe in this budget, or we can vote to lower it. It goes back to town hall. A second town meeting is established. I don't know what that means for any proposed override. If the vote is rejected again, it goes back to school committee. They can reaffirm, or they can vote another amount again. Then that third town meeting is the cumulative combined with both towns, and it's called the super town meeting. So I think there needs to be strong talk if, because I believe I've heard from one member town that, well, if the override fails, then the schools just get the 5%.
Yeah, that's
Like, so,
That's not the way it works.
and I also want to mention that 5%, we settled on 5%. I don't know who we is, and I don't know that schools have ever agreed to 5%. We establish a budget like zero-based also. What are the needs of the children? I have the budget book here with a graph, and if we're only talking about this half going up 5%, well, this is the state aid part that's not going up at all, at least this year. Okay? So how are we really funding our contractual obligations even when only half of this is 5%? It's not. And I truly know, I sat in that room across from John Madden in 2019, and he said 5% for the budget. The budget. It's never been 5% for the assessment. It never has. You look at other area towns and their education line, and it's 5. Because your municipal departments are 2.5. They have additional contractual above the 2.5%. So I really question that 5% even
Okay.
on an
It
assessment
was-
period.
Thank you for your comments. Rosemary?
Actually, she was kind of leading into some of the things I was talking about. And I'm going to speak to you about the financial aspect. We are in hold timeless, and that is preventing that gray section of the budget from growing, if you'd like to show it again. That is preventing that. The hold timeless is holding back on a lot of money. And the only way to get out of hold timeless is to create a product that keeps people in. We're clearly not doing that 11 years in hold timeless. So best practices say that we should, when you're in hold harmless, you need to figure out a way to keep families there, provide services, make people want them. So for that amount to shrink to 5%, you are permanently keeping us in hold harmless. You're permanently keeping the state where that gray section won't increase. Excuse me. And then a different section of that is this is an adjustment after, you think about how much we were paying off to Hanson's budget. This is an adjustment where we're fixing it because we had an erosive financial model where you couldn't grow because half of our investment went off to other taxpayers. So now we're beginning to sort of recognize the proper investment. So it's going to hit a point where you can grow at 5%, but when you were in the bottom 1% for the state, it's hard to say you were investing correctly in education. The results are obvious. Declining enrollment is obvious for 1% of the state. And the suggestions you're making is to perpetuate that underinvestment and go against best practices and remain in hold harmless. And that's something I can't abide for because the low funding creates risk to the town. Lawsuits for not handling IEPs. As a teacher, you know this. Lawsuits are not burdened by the school district. They ultimately are paid for by the town. We are liable for anything that we don't meet. That's why this budget is separate. That's why we can't undermine the sovereignty of a school committee because there are so many laws attached to that.
Okay, so I think we've covered maybe 3 points, right, that we talked about last week when we voted to not support the override. John, does anything come to your mind? We talked about the sustainability piece. We talked about long-term financial planning. these are some of the other reasons, and Kathleen touched on it when she said, you know, what a $500,000 override really is. I mean, we've been putting Band-Aids on this budget for quite a while, right? And I know I had a conversation with Mary Beth to talk about longer-term financial planning. Nobody wants to look at an operational override that's in the millions of dollars on the heels of capital projects that we just voted on. But the reality is, if we find ourselves in a hole, we got to put the shovel down. I think to your point, right? We're not climbing, right? With the process that we're using. So I think a long-term financial plan involves looking at the impact and the possibility of having a operational override. Sean.
Again, in the letter that I sent out over the week, I tried to hit on the point that we have made significant progress over the last 10 years. The student-teacher ratio has significantly improved, despite that we're getting low funding from the state because of the whole harmless situation. We also have people who have just invested in a new middle school. So I think to make the argument that we're not investing in the town, in the schools, that kind of falls short of me. We have been making slow investments. Investing in the school at 5% is prioritizing them already at the start of the budget. When Mary Beth looks for revenue, and she's found revenue, and we have some additional revenue, and the schools are in at 5%, that means we do kind of piecemeal in some of the other departments to hold them, the police departments and their underfunded, they're not filling all their
shifts,
things like that we take some of that revenue and put in there, the maintenance that was discussed, so then the other departments come up closer to the 5%, but the school's already in there at a prioritized 5% budget. And 5% for the school, 2.5% to the school budget on just about a $20 million assessment is a significant amount of money. That's a significant amount of money, so to make the argument that we're not funding them, I don't think that. I think funding the schools at 5% over the last 10 years when we're in the whole harmless situation is a significant investment that this town has done all without an override. You know what I mean? And the $500,000 override that we're asking for, it's relatively small for the school. Yeah, it's $500,000 doesn't go a whole lot with the schools, but that would be the entire library budget. $500,000 is the entire library budget. It's the entire technology budget. So it isn't a small override. These are revenues that would allow us to keep going in a sustainable way. You take away that revenue, and then we have to do something that's going to cut into the bone, whether it's we're cutting into capital or we're cutting into our other operational departments. And you've seen the results of cutting into capital over the last 10 years. It's going to leave us kind of vulnerable in areas. So these are the steps that we're trying to take to get back on the stable ground.
Right. And I just want to go to Rosemary, but I just want to say one thing about the cut to the bone, right? All I want to say is about capital. That's not a bone, right? We have been funding capital at 100% for the last several years. 100% of every project that Capital Committee has recommended has gone to the voters and been accepted, right? So it's not like we've been neglecting our capital investments or our infrastructure, right? I think we've done an amazing job with the limited resources.
I just meant the long gap between if we had funded the DPW 10 years ago.
Without a doubt. That would have been fine. That would have been a better idea, for sure.
Just a point of clarification. To compare, are you saying that, because 2% in every other school is not a large override. So I want to be clear here that 5% isn't a lot for towns. The other towns, some are up to 11%. Some are at 10, 20% right now. Like really. So 5% is very, very low comparative to school budgets. And as a Finance Committee past member, you'll know that in the beginning of the Finance Committee handbook, it tells you up to around 50 to 80% of your budget in some towns can be schools. But you really are roughly about 50. We're not even there. So when we're talking about this, the school's kind of the same as the library, whatever, I know that you know that that's a misleading statement. I know you know that. Additionally, we can look at what happens when you don't fund to get aid at the library. We meet the level at the library that brings in the aid. We haven't done that same process. So the libraries are very similar, where they fund towards the population. And if you meet a certain amount, they give you extra aid. It's the same thing here. We're not at the point where we're providing a service that gets us the students. We're sort of in a compromised position to get aid. I hope that we'd start to look differently at this.
Okay, so just want to kind of bring in any other points. Again, what we wanted you to do is come and present the methods and the impetus that the Board of Selectmen has put on having an override on this warrant, right? For me, I'm not convinced. I listen, I respectfully understand all of the time that you've put into the budget, the messages that you sent by email for the committee to evaluate. But again, it's going to be up to this committee whether or not they support that warrant article, right? I think we just got the Article 2. I think the discussion is still in its infancy. Unfortunately for the Finance Committee, we now have posted 3 meetings in a row in order to digest what's in that Article 2, right? So in my mind, the assessment from the school is the assessment from the school. And I would like to know, because Dawn has made a point of it, to if the ballot question or the warrant article fails, what does that do to the assessment? Where does that bring, what is the town hopeful for if in fact the ballot initiative fails? What is the town hopeful that will bring?
First, I'd like to say that if the Jeff and Beth support an override and the town supports an override, I find it odd that the Finance Committee would not also support an override.
What?
That's like saying if I support the override and
everybody
Sean
gets it.
supports the override, why are you guys opposed?
No,
Right?
but I mean to
I don't represent the
AO.
Finance Committee.
Yeah, no.
but
And Beth
nobody-
doesn't
Beth doesn't
represent
either.
the
It was
full-
irresponsible
right.
to even take any motion
To
or
me.
anything.
She didn't take a motion.
Well, it sounds like
I mean,
there was
at the-
deliberation
Well,
with
okay,
that.
we're gonna.
Maybe you could hear how it's procedurally going to work at the meeting.
Okay, that's really what I asked for.
Okay. So if the article doesn't pass, then I think that we would default
Well, we're going to take it out of order too, right?
Right, I think that that's what we should do, is take it out of order, because we would need to know that, to know which budget we're looking at. So if that article does not pass, I think that you would go over to the selectmen recommend without override. Now, in that, to fund the extra, all on the town, all non-union people are at a 0. Are the schools
Well, these are your-
non-union at a 0?
These are your recommendations, right?
I don't think so. Huh?
Mary Beth, these are your recommendations.
These
Yeah.
are the recommendations. If
For
the
the
article
Article
were
2,
not to
right,
pass, we
yeah.
would then be looking at selectmen recommend without override.
But just
And that's
realize
the
we'll be
cuts.
looking at what the Finance Committee
Yeah,
recommends.
Article 2,
Right.
we own
Right.
it, so you can
Right.
have
So,
whatever.
but keep going. Yeah.
Well, you make your recommendations, and how are you making them on both columns? That I'm not sure about.
I'm not really sure about the process either, that's why I'm asking you.
Right.
The budget
So
today.
normally, you would just have the selectmen recommended column, and then you would make your recommendations on that column.
Well, they might not necessarily be the same.
Right.
Right.
But I mean, that's what you would either recommend yes or no.
Well, the
or
totals
no.
would be the same,
You'd be-
right?
Right, so I don't know when you make your recommendations, which column you are going to make your recommendations on for dual
Rick,
article.
we've done this before. There's only one Article 2 by law. There's only one, and we did this already.
Well, it's a contingency budget, right,
Yeah,
that she's
it's a
referring to?
contingent. So she can, that's fine, but we'll be making ours, and there's only one Article 2, one.
This is it, this
Yeah,
one.
and that will be the one that we dictate. That's our
That's when
job.
you make your recommendations on.
Yep,
Correct.
and that's the one that's given to the public.
Absolutely.
And that's the one that's...
So, but
You are correct.
knowing that, right, let's talk about how we have a collaborative effort in this budget process, and that we should move in that direction, right? I talked to Sean a little bit about communication in his email, right? We need to do a better job. We shouldn't find out that the Board of Selectmen is having a Zoom meeting to vote an override by email, right? That's the way the process should work, an ideal situation. We're understanding that the Board of Selectmen is the only one that can call for an override. We understand the school committee can't call for an override, the finance committee can't call for an override. But to communicate that that's the direction the Board of Selectmen is moving towards, it would help us better understand it if we didn't find out about it in the media,
But it
right?
was discussed at the meeting, the joint meeting.
It was an
But
override.
it
was
failed
discussed.
at the joint meeting.
Right?
It failed.
There wasn't a vote taken. The joint meeting, we
Oh, that's,
discussed.
I'm talking, at the meeting for the school committee, it failed. So there should have never been any procedure.
No, I'm talking about the joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen and the Finance
And I think
Committee.
it was clear.
Right.
It was discussed, right?
It was
An
discussed,
override?
and I think it was pretty clearly mentioned
Right.
that the Finance Committee was not supportive of an override that was specific to the schools.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I said, to find out that's the direction of the board, just would have been better if we had more communication. That's all I'm saying.
I can definitely work to improve that,
Yeah.
for sure. But the time crunch of, I'm gonna get this messed up, but we had a Monday meeting, right? Because we had a real time crunch with putting our agenda together so that we could, the schools had the meeting Monday.
We met Tuesday.
We met Tuesday,
Next
but we
day.
didn't have enough time to put on our agenda. We wanted to talk about the override at that meeting, at the Tuesday meeting, but because we didn't have enough time to modify what they decided the day before,
You
we
posted
had to
for
go
Thursday.
to Thursday.
Right.
So it was
To get
a
48
time
hours
crunch that-
notice.
And we couldn't go beyond that, because if we went beyond that, we wouldn't have enough time to get it on the warrant.
35
Right,
days
yeah.
for the town clerk.
So again, when you listen to our Finance Committee meeting from last week, it was, I'm probably exasperated by the fact that we now are very limited in the amount of time that we have to evaluate your Article 2, right, that you're submitting, that will eventually be the Selectmen's Article 2, Selectmen's budget, right, and make recommendations. But there are so many other moving parts to the warrant, right? And I think if we spend, and I want to keep you here for the whole time, right? I know this isn't your favorite place to be on a Tuesday night, but let's just talk about other ways that we can fund the 509,000, right? That's not part of an override.
Can I say one thing?
Go ahead.
Okay, so the numbers that you have in front of you that you had on March 26th are basically the same numbers that are still there today. The fire department changed, maybe the town clerk number is a little different.
And the 5% number. Is it-
In the selectmen recommend with override column, which was the TA recommend column. So those numbers are the same numbers that you've had for a few weeks. What's changed is, since the school changed their assessment, I had to come in and,
Right.
and change these and update these. So those are different.
Right.
I agree.
So
But
that's
most
what
of
I mean
these are
about
basically
catching
the
up.
same. Right. Right. So those are the same.
So those are the numbers
Sorry.
we have to catch up with,
Yeah.
that's all. It's
Yeah.
as simple as that.
And what was your
And I
next
know
question?
that, I didn't have one. Rosemary, did you want to say something?
We have a lot of articles that are grant dependent here. And if that MBTA Community Act doesn't pass, we don't get those grants. Maybe pausing on a lot of those to see what happens and doing that in the fall town meeting might be the best idea to make a decision.
No.
None of the articles in the budget, in the warrant now, are dependent on One Stop, which is the MBT community.
With the one-stop one.
Yeah.
You're right.
Okay, so one of the things that, oh, did you have something else?
Yeah, it's real quick. How many departments actually we complied to what you actually wanted them to do, level funded?
Oh,
None?
two?
Two,
Maybe?
yeah.
You know which ones they were?
Veterans,
Absolutely not.
Finance Committee.
real close.
Yeah. Did they give you a reason why they wouldn't do that?
Well, I think that when Frank told me to level fund, I level funded. No matter what he said,
Right.
I follow directions.
Right.
But, the police, the fire, the DPW, I don't think that they've ever but I didn't know that as a treasurer collector. I would just, 2%, I put in 2%. I would never think of putting in 3, or if it was 0, I would never think of putting in 1. So I don't know, but not many of them actually, but that's basically where they ended up, right? Right back where they started.
So, and you know what? Truth be told, every department is the same. The school committee advocates for the needs of the students, right? So they come in with 11.1%, right? It's no different than the fire coming in at 12.6. I mean, it's no less trying for us to try to balance.
Oh, it's always the
and make
case.
it
There's only so
sustainable.
much money in the
Right.
tax base, and the people are going to get frustrated out there once they find out what's
Right.
going on with the override. People want the override. It's going to be an interesting one out there.
So what I'm just hopeful for that we can do tonight, and just before we wrap up the discussion with the Board of Selectmen here and talking about because again, we're not talking about right and wrong processes here. We're talking about taking different paths to get to the end of town meeting, right? It ultimately is going to be up to the voters to decide which way they want to go forward. But all I'm saying is, one of the things that we should talk about is Article 37, right? And just to use a specific example, if you take a look at Article 37, this is the tips, right? Remember we had a discussion about bringing Bruce, well, Bruce was unavailable to come in tonight. But Bruce gave us some real good information. I shared it with the committee. And this is one of the 8 emails that came in a minute and a half. I do not expect the Finance Committee to know or have read all of that information. I'm going to just give you a quick snapshot of the discussion I had with Bruce today. And one of the questions for Finance Committee that you asked was, how much have we spent on this so far? Well, year 1, we spent $62,000. Year 2, we spent $200,000. But of that money, they've only spent $50,000. So we really have $150,000 left. And this is an important project. I don't want to diminish that, right? This is a vital thing for the town of Whitman. I don't think anybody's in disagreement that has saw the presentation of what the east end of Whitman could look like under this scenario, and the fact that the state is paying the bill. We just have to do the homework at the beginning, right? But he said that the bottom line is the $316,900 doesn't have to come out of free cash this year. In order for the project to move forward and not be interrupted, they need $155,900, right? So all I'm saying is that frees up some capacity, right, in order to apply to the delta, the $509,000. And I'm not saying this is the only place, but when we were together last week and we were talking about the reasons why we weren't supportive of an override was we feel there are other ways to get that $509,000 that don't include an override. And that's partially one of them. But I'll open it up if you guys have any input on that.
I can wait.
Funding.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Wow, we've really got ourselves in a pickle here. But anyway, everybody's trying to do the right thing. We're all trying to get to the right place. Like Rick said, different paths. As I sit here thinking about the last couple of years being on Finance Committee where we worked hard and we got to maybe a week or so before, and then we want to be using free cash, stabilization, things that we didn't want to do. So last week as we sat here and talked, here we were kind of flipping it. I was talking about, hey, you know what? Besides the negotiations, maybe we could bridge the gap that way. Never thought I'd say that. Hearing what you were talking about of trying to get more policy, schools, starting in somewhere, getting some good direction, that's great information. I mean, if I heard that, like last week, I'm processing it now, and I can understand that. Mary Beth, you shared some information with us on school salaries recently. Yes, that was the first time in my 9 years that I've ever seen anything like that.
Well, John Noon brought it up on the town side. There were about 9.
Yep.
And the school center.
Yeah, so that was the first time
picture.
That's the first time I ever saw that picture in 9 years. And I could say that was kind of eye-opening to a point, too. So it made me look at, hey, we've always seen the town and what they're getting. So this kind of allowed me to see what they were getting. So, it kind of brought things into a different focus. But concerned about the override with all the stuff going on, even though it is a small one, and the size of it is small, might be more apt to pass. Like Rick has said, sustainability, if we, maybe I hate to kick the can, maybe it's not the right time to do it, and hoping that if we have to come up with other small overrides, people will just get sick of it with all the other stuff going on. So I think that's why we sat around the table last week and we were talking that way, to maybe try to take a little different path, even though it's a path we've maybe been down before and it wasn't one we like to go down. That was, in my mind, that was part of my vote last week.
Okay, I'm going to go Sean and then Mary Beth.
Yeah, no, thanks, Joe. I appreciate that feedback. And I think opening up more lines of communication and be able to specifically answer questions that you have is definitely a personal goal of mine. As far as the moving forward in kind of a sustainable way, I do think we need to consider what happens when the school does come out of the hold harmless situation and they begin to get funded sustainably from the state. That is going to be a big shift. We've been in this hold harmless situation because, for lots of reasons, but I think one of the primary reasons is because of the drop in enrollment. Over the last 11 years, we've dropped like 800 students, That's a significant drop over a long, slow period of time. And we've been stuck with this hold harmless situation, so lack of state funding. But I think relatively soon, who knows if it's next year or the next couple of years, but there's going to be a point where we come out of the hold harmless situation, we begin to stabilize, and the state kicks in more money at a sustainable level. When that happens, this conversation definitely changes. You know what I mean? And I'm praying that we're relatively close to that number. The school is predicting a mild increase in enrollment next year, which is a good sign. I think things like investing
Where are
in
you getting a projected increase?
Yeah, this is what this is the concern I'm having with this conversation.
I
It's
just
dangerous.
took the slideshow that they shared last year with the projected numbers and this year's, and I just looked at the two, and it's definitely an increase. There's a projected on that from this year's, and then they did the same thing last year. So I'm looking at the two, and it shows.
Are you looking at the same slide presentation that
Yeah.
Dawn has in front of her?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe you could show her the page.
No, I took that and I put it on a spreadsheet, and then I took last year's and put it on a spreadsheet. And
You
just got
squinted a little?
What?
You squinted?
No, I'll be honest with you, Chair, if I may.
I could resist. Yes,
I
go
did the
ahead.
same exercise, and there just hasn't been enough time during the school committee with so many questions to ask for me to address this particular question.
It's
But
a key piece,
Sean,
yeah.
the numbers do increase by 75 kids.
Not eight.
I don't know where we're getting 75 kids in this projection, to be honest with you. So I do question, I understand you making that statement, but I don't know where 75 new kids are coming in September of 2024. I just haven't had the opportunity to ask that in this.
All right, and I just wanted to say, too, that hope isn't going to get us there.
Yeah, thank you.
Right.
Hope and change.
So hold on, I don't, to finish my point, hope isn't going to get there. Being sustainably funded from the schools is a critical factor in getting us to more stable ground. Right now, we're not there yet. We're still in the hold harmless situation. That's why
Funded
we're
by the
funding
state, you meant?
By the state.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Yes,
said
sir.
schools.
When the schools are sustainably funded by the state, the pressure for an override will be relieved from us. We won't have
Yep, I'll
this
get you.
crazy override hanging over our heads because this is going to be the next 5 years. The next 5 years will look different when we're sustainably funded by the state. We won't have to kick in extra money. So that's a key piece for us to consider.
It is definitely a piece to consider. Go ahead.
I'm going to
And then I'll go to Al.
I'm going to ask really seriously that you listen to this, because I think anybody at this table knows that I was the one who warned people about the hold harmless reduction before it happened. And thank goodness there were people on school committee that put forward better services or more services and pushed hard for full day K. The way to get out of hold harmless is to add services families want. The reason we have increase that's in primarily on the Whitman side is from full day K primarily. If you pull back from this budget, if you want to keep your 5% and you don't get it to a point where we can't go forward at 5% out of hold harmless, you will fail. You will not get out, and it will continue the erosive financial model that we are in. So I'm warning right now, and I've had a history of warning correctly. This is a big, dangerous mistake. And you aren't understanding hold harmless, if that is your statement.
That's your interpretation,
It isn't
right?
my interpretation, it's
His
accurate.
opinion you're interpreting.
Well, I was able to predict correctly most
We
things.
are definitely thankful that you're able to predict. But what we're talking about is hold harmless,
Hold
harmless, and the effect that has on our budget. It's important. I agree. It is important.
I think don't sidetrack from the fact that if we don't
I'm not
provide,
sidetracking.
okay, that we don't provide a product that parents want to send their kid to, if we continue to fund in a way that strips, which this next move that you're going to make will do, what, up to 20 teachers, we will remain in hold harmless. We will remain not receiving millions and millions of extra dollars for just spending a small amount and giving the opportunity for it to be spent in a way that is impactful.
All right, let's go to Al, and then I want to go back to Kathleen, and let's talk about what the impacts of the 5% are. Okay, you
I know,
studied this
off
budget
the
in
top of my
very
head.
detail. So Al, go
No,
ahead.
just bring up the state funding. I mean, state funding is not coming back as much as it used to be. You're going to see it diminish. It's going to be $1 billion. The state will be in the hole, $1 billion in the deficit. So I wouldn't be looking for that to bail us out. That's not going to happen. You know, from the federal government down to the state level, it's not going to happen. So we throw this up, and just put it out, Sean. It's not going to be there. That type of money.
Hold on. We're going to go to Kathleen.
If you-
and then
facts on that. You
What's
need
that?
to send something that shows that.
Yeah, but
I am
it's
looking at the
projected, it's in the
statement.
it was in the newspaper not so long ago.
Send it,
An article
send
with
it
me,
to
please.
Okay, so Kathleen,
Okay.
thank you, Al.
Yeah.
We're in a position, and I appreciate, Sean, everything that you do. You put a lot of time and effort into it, and you do a great job of communicating. Just because we don't agree doesn't mean that we're both wrong, or one of us is right and one of us is wrong. We both work very hard. We both look at the numbers. We both do a lot of research. What bothers me about this potential override approach to funding the schools is that what's at stake after 4 years of COVID is 4 elementary school teachers at the Conley School, 4 elementary teachers at the Duval. Kids who have been through for kindergarten, first grade, no, they've been home as babies, but the children who have been in kindergarten, first, second grade, are now third, fourth, fifth graders. They're going to have class sizes that they haven't seen in years. For Hanson, it means 3 elementary school teachers and 4 middle school teachers. So we're talking the frontline people. We're not talking about middle management. If it were a curriculum director or somebody hired to be an analyst of numbers, I wouldn't have my heart on my sleeve. But knowing that these children who have survived COVID, why did they survive COVID? Because their classroom teachers showed up. I was a classroom teacher at Pembroke High School for 4 years, so I know what it was like teaching in the years of COVID. I actually ran into a girl recently who recognized me, Miss Otina, and I had only seen her with the mask on, and I said, only look at the eyes. I said, Maddie? And she was so happy that I recognized her. It's like, I was so happy I recognized her. I'd only seen her eyes. I'd never seen her full face. So as intelligent human beings, we're given facts, and we can have guidelines, and I appreciate that we do have some financial guidelines, but we also have the time and we also have the opportunity to look at, is there a way to get through this one more year? And I believe that there is a way to get through this one more year so that we don't have second, third, fourth, and fifth graders in Conley and in Duval shoved into classrooms that they haven't been in during the period we were trying to address the emotional and the education gaps that they experienced during COVID, which are documented and they're real. So what's at stake by not one more year reaching a compromise with the schools with funds that are available, and I believe there are funds available in the Whitman small pot of cash to fund the school department one more year to protect, and I'm so not saying it's the children, we always have to save the children, but the specifics of these cuts that the superintendent outlined in his update budget are scary. And if we have the potential to protect the education of these children, then I'm going to advocate for it. And I really, Mary Beth, I do appreciate all the effort that you've put in. I think it was a sincere effort. And Sean, I know that you have a commitment to a stable financial projection. I've gone to the same, who was the fellow we both like, from Northborough at the ATFC. I understand that there are the big pictures, but you're also looking at the little pictures. And the little pictures are what is the impact of our decision if we decide to go this way? And a $500,000 override is not going to solve the long-term financial challenges of the town, and it's going to annoy the voters, and it's not, $95 is not the way to fund the school budget or the town budget by saying put it on an override. And saying that any year when they're over 5%, we're going to have them put it on an override, this is the first time I've heard that. It's like, holy cow. Anytime they go over 5%, they're going to do it knowing that they're going to be shoved into an override. That's not a policy that I've heard spoken before, and I would work against that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me go to Mary Beth and then to Sean. You want to make a comment? Rosemary?
I said, why have a school?
No. I said, do you want to make a comment? You're third in line.
Oh, yeah.
You're third in line.
Okay.
Mary Beth.
Take a number.
Okay. I have one grandchild at Conley going into fourth and one going into second.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the teachers you're talking about
Yep.
cutting. I don't want to see that either,
Yep.
without a doubt. However, I don't think it has to come to that the town loses or the school loses if an override is put forth and supported. I think $95 that people will pay it. Now, that's just my opinion. So, on this, what you're not going to be able to tell when you look at this budget, because I didn't spell it out anywhere on a separate sheet of paper, but if we go with the selectmen recommend without override, that's the secondary budget that I put together.
And let me just interrupt you one second. Just can you highlight what she's going to say, because none of us have a copy of the Article 2 that you sent today.
I highlighted, do you see it in yellow? Highlighted in yellow? I think but just to let you know, the first one is a clerical person will be gone from the assessor's office. That's one person there. When you get to the town clerk, a clerical, they will lose a clerical person there. So instead of 2 people and the department head, they'll be down to 1. When we go to the police, you can't really tell. I did highlight it in yellow. That's 3 police officers that are laid off there. And for fire, you can't tell there either. That's 3 firefighters that I've reduced there as well. When you go down to the highway department and parks, that's 1 employee. You can't tell from that number, but it's 1 employee being laid off. The health department, the admin there, 1 position will be reduced. And council on aging, 1 of the part-time clerical will be lost there as well. On top of that, let me just see if there's anything else. All non-union personnel are at a 0. So if we go with this budget, we lose all these positions, everyone takes a 0. The school would be made whole with everybody getting their raises. I've already reduced this budget by well over $1 million just if we go with the 5%. The secondary budget is devastating. If we have this override and we put that forward, $95, I think it will pass. And we will have a very tightened budget with 5%. However, we'll be whole and we will not lose people. And the schools, if the override passes, they're whole as well.
Okay, so I just want to just throw something out there, right? That scenario with those people lost is not assuming that we take one-time funds and supplement the budget this year,
That's
as we
correct.
did last year.
That is correct.
So there is a way to avoid that carnage that you're describing, right? I mean, if we look at it from a perspective of this budget season is not one that we're going to fix our long-term problems, right? This is not the year to do that. But this isn't the year to do that either, right? So there's a compromise within this process for us to take one-time funds, as the school has done with their E&D, and supplement this budget so we're not looking at those type of job losses that you're describing.
And that's if the ballot, it goes to the ballot and it fails.
No, this is if it didn't go to the ballot.
Oh.
We'd be looking at those. But again, then we would be taking money
Voted in favor.
away from capital projects for the town.
You're right, we are.
So it's
We
not
absolutely
money
are.
that's just free
No,
laying around
it's
out
definitely
there.
not. There's a cost, but to me, in my mind, figuring all these other things that we're talking about, and the bigger picture about a long-term sustainable budget, a $509,000 override does not make sense to me, that's all. I'm gonna go to Rosemary?
I would like to check some of these salaries, John, comparative. You vote these salaries, you vote this. Do you do comparisons for other towns? Is this an exorbitant? Are people getting these exorbitant salaries like that sort of they're trying to represent here? Is that a fact?
Which salary?
Well, maybe put it into context. We were provided with a list of all of the school district employees and their salaries.
Comparative to other school district employees and their salaries. Is Whitman Hanson?
I've never had the list of other towns. That would be the job of the union, negotiating contracts, and the school committee's subcommittee of negotiations, who's done that. Okay, I haven't, the salaries of schools is also in our budget.
Yeah, it shows that. That's broken up.
What I want to comment on is that the school is not whole right now. When we voted our new assessment and applied E&D, we voted to not fill 5 positions. So we're losing 5 positions. We just agreed to that as a school committee to cut 5 positions in essence. So that needs to be clear.
That is the compromise that I'm referring to. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So then
So this assessment, we're not whole. We're not whole.
There was a question to you as well. Okay.
let me go to Sean, and then you got a question to me?
To you, because you stated, this is great, we want the South Ave, and we have, we're going to get this money back. When I look on the state site, and when I called in to talk to Old Colony, they said this grant has not been approved. They have not approved our grant, that we're working towards getting an approval, but that is
Right.
their whole entire budget for an entire year, if they do approve it. We're sort of hoping, again, that we might. So what happens when we spend all of this money and they deny this entire budget? I haven't really seen that they've used their whole entire budget on any one town in the past, but I did ask the question, if a town has never or very rarely has ever pulled, would you increase their consideration? There was hemming and hawing, and they said, maybe a little, essentially. That meeting is recorded, you can listen. But basically, they have their plans out to 2029, and we're not part of them. That grant is not in up till 2029.
Well, they were pretty specific about the timeline. They did say this is a 5-year process. That is, you're not going to start construction till 2030, right? So, yeah, we're not going to be building this project.
Okay, so this can delay.
But if we do not fund at a certain level,
Right.
then we're going to fall behind, and we'll get behind in the queue. Was that a fair assessment?
It's a $15 million project. We have to come up with $1.5 million in that 5 years. So we're trying to save towards that. I'm 100% going with the 316. I think that's the smart and wise thing to do, to lose the opportunity of a $15 million project because we get to year 5 and oops, we didn't fund it. And then how are we going to come up with a big chunk all at once? So this is the correct way, to put a little bit away each year towards this project so we have what we need for that TIP project.
Quick question, so that 316, is that just going to be like encumbered to go towards that?
Right,
Or would
that will
it wouldn't be spent, as you were saying, Bruce said,
Some of it may be, some of it may be
We were
for the
told
design.
that there's right now, there is only 50 out of 200,000 that is spent so far. So I respectfully disagree with Mary Beth's plan that the 316.9 needs to be expended this particular year. This is something that needs to be evaluated and part of a comprehensive, and what we're talking about is an override that encompasses all town departments and gives us a sustainability to get us to the plateau you keep mentioning too about the retirement. And
That's
where
2029,
but we can't limp along for 5 years with Band-Aids on this budget. It's just
Maybe
not
that's
going to
your
get us
override.
there.
Maybe that's your override.
So
It's part of it, yeah.
Yeah.
So
you're hinting at using the one-time money instead of for the capital project, but to put it in the operating budget.
partially, yes.
So what we're saying is, at least what I'm saying is, we want to move away from that process.
I
By
agree.
putting it into the operating budget, you do begin to inflate a budget that's already difficult to manage because of the whole harmless situation.
Yeah.
Then you make it a little bit bigger.
Right.
Just like we made it a little bit bigger the last 6 years by going over and above. So then the 5% that we're talking about right now is bigger than what it would have been if we stuck to the 5% over the last 5 years, because it's inflated because of the whole harmless situation. So hold on. So when you take away that $500,000 and we find it with one-time money, now next year's 5% is that much bigger, and you're making us that much less sustainable. What we want to do is we want to head that off. The 5% isn't a hard, crazy rule. But it's tied to Proposition 2.5. Proposition 2.5 limits how much taxation we can increase each year. So 5% is 2.5 over the Prop 2.5. So we're already prioritizing the school budget by 2.5% over Prop 2.5. So the revenue that we take in, new growth, most of that is going to go to the schools to cover the 5%. If we get a little bit more new growth each year, then we feed into the other departments a little bit above the 2.5. You know what I mean? That's kind of what we've been doing. And it has been successful over the last 11 years. We have made investments slowly to the schools. We've made the teacher-student ratio that much better. I know you said that there is talk recently about state aid drying up, right?
Yeah.
But for schools whose enrollment is increasing, they are getting Chapter 70 funds at a rate that is sustainable right now. You know what I mean? We're just not in that situation. But if we were, we would be. It's kind of separate from some of those other funds. funds maybe that you're thinking of.
Right, I mean, I just show them where I started, it's actually $3 billion in the whole of the state.
Sure.
Yeah, but
You know,
they have a
yeah,
stabilization
but
account of 80.
I'm sure they don't, but that's,
One more point, Rick.
you know, they don't.
Yesterday.
The state's run out of money.
We do.
Okay.
We have rainy day money.
The last point, sorry, is
Yeah.
you mentioned the teachers, which I think is terrible. Obviously, I'm a teacher. I work in the school system. The school administration is putting forth a plan to cut teachers, but there are 1,000 decisions that go into the way a budget is designed and developed, and the final budget that you present. They're choosing to cut those teachers. They're keeping the interventionists and they're keeping all the special ed teachers. No matter what the scenario, they said at the bottom of that document that no special ed teachers will be cut, and the interventionists that they have hired with the ESSA funds will be kept. That's a good thing, obviously, and there are regulations that really drive them in that direction. But some of the teachers that they're choosing are by their choice. I don't know all the decisions that have gone into that. I don't think they're cutting any administrators. You know, I didn't see that on the paper. Like, they are making these decisions about the budget, and that's beyond our control. What we're putting forward, for me, is a budget that is sustainable. It's gonna make us a bit more sustainable with time, and with the small override for the school, big override for the town, we keep the core integrity of what we need to do moving forward. We're much worse off if we continue to make ourselves less sustainable over time. That puts everybody in all of our departments at risk. Yeah.
I agree. I agree with that principle, right? But
Yes.
I think we paid a pretty good sum of money to have professional consultants, and not to diminish your ability to evaluate our financial positions or forecasts, but these professionals told us that we will need an override in a certain amount of time. The only thing that delayed that was the school assessment to the town of Whitman being reduced, and the COVID one-time monies coming in to the town. Those things delayed this inevitable, right? It is not something that we're going to be able to limp along without. I think it was made very clear, and the situations have changed. There's different things in place, but the need for an operational override is not going to go away. And then we should have addressed it 2 years ago. We absolutely should have, as much as we should have, as you mentioned earlier, thought about our capital investment in our DPW 15 years ago and would have paid that building off by now. So we haven't made, really wise long-term financial decisions. I think the time to start doing that is now. That's all.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, so as far as an override, we've needed it for 7 years. We haven't done it, but we passed a Whitman Middle School. If we have a large override, which I told you, I'll put in the work, I will.
Yeah.
I'll come in weekends, I'll do whatever. But you can't just say, let's take $5 million, throw it against, that should be enough. I mean, you have to do a lot of planning.
No doubt about it.
The school had a 5-year plan, but that was only through 2028. They said in their 2028 number that they had originally projected, the fiscal 25 number that they had originally projected from Hanson, actually came in a little lower this year than what they had on that 5-year plan at the time. The number for Whitman, well, our assessment actually came in higher, what they had projected. So a plan is like a budget, right? They'll do their best to go out 5 years. But they don't have a 5-year plan right now because they did it through 28. So yes, if you want to do that, we'll put a 5-year plan together for the town side. But then if you say $5 million, how much is the school going to want? So are you looking at, on top of the Whitman Middle School, on top of the new DPW, on top of a South Shore VOTEC looming vote, a $10 million override? And
Sure.
With the possibility of having a $500,000 override, probably diminishing the possibility that will fail. That's what I'm saying.
I agree.
I think the taxpayers are smart enough to know we have got ourselves in this position and we need to collectively get ourselves out. So that's why I'm advocating for a longer term approach, not for a short-term $509,000 override in this fiscal year. That's all I'm going to say. I'm going to get to Mike and then Justin.
Yeah, just a point that came up last week is many towns that go for an override also include language that says we will not come back to you for 5 years for another override. Newton did this to get their schools passed. Whether we put that in the statements, the article itself or not, in everybody's head, okay, we'll do it now. don't come back to me for the next 4 or 5 years.
But we just did one last year.
Which is where they may already sit there and go,
Operational
I gave it to
No,
you.
override, just an override.
Yeah,
But,
capital.
but that's, they may
Still
already have that in their
override.
heads.
Override.
That's my point here, is that's well advertised at this point, and, you have to take that into account. People's pay are not rising anywhere.
Okay, I'm gonna get to Justin and then Mary Beth and then back to Sean. Go
The
ahead.
ability to
So I am sympathetic to your arguments. I know I sat on that table with you guys for a couple of years. That using some one-time money might bridge the gap to build a bigger override. But just in the short term, if Whitman does that and Hanson doesn't, we're still in the same situation. Both towns need to pass the school budget at the level that it's set. So, and from what it sounds like, Hanson does not have the free cash to balance the budget, so they have to go for an override. I don't see the reason for Whitman not to put forward an override, which would be more sustainable in the long term, because the 5% growth would be on top of that new assessment for next year. And it shouldn't be as big of an increase. Now that all the ESSER funds have come out, all of the, it's less E&D than it was last year. A lot of that one-time inflation is coming out of the school budget. There's none on the town side in the current situation. That a $500,000 override is a better baseline to build from for next year for the school budget.
Okay, Mary Beth.
Yes, I agree that homeowners and their salaries are not going up. Look at what we're facing at the market and everywhere else. However, I feel an override, call it what you want, it's still impacting a household's budget. Whether it's an override for a school, an operational override, vote tech override, DPW override. The bottom line is all the taxpayers really care about is how much more money do I have to squeeze out of my budget. And we did just have a large couple of overrides. So I'm very, cognizant of that fact. But certainly if the Board of Selectmen want to see a townwide, override next year, 5-year plan, I'll put all that together, but I still think that, like Hanson's doing, they're having an override this year and they're having a big override next year. Do I personally think that the taxpayers have the appetite for it? That's to be seen. I personally wouldn't after what we've just passed, but who's to say, right? It's bring it to the ballot box and they'll know.
All right, I'm gonna go to Sean and then Mike and then Rosemary.
Just quickly, the Madden report, he does reference the switch to the statutory method at the very bottom of that report, and he says it would drastically change the nature of Whitman's finances. It's clear at the very bottom of that report. He says he didn't analyze it, and if that does happen, then Whitman's finances drastically change. So that's something to consider, because we did switch to statutory method. So that did change Whitman's finances. And then if we do come out of, or when we do come out of hold harmless, that changes any 5-year plan, because if we were to have an override 5 years ago, that would be much, and when you're in this long downward trend of enrollment, that's much different when you're in a stable enrollment trend. Because if you're in a stable enrollment trend, we're getting the money sustainably from the state, then again, the need for us to have an override is relieved, because we can take more of our revenue and move it to where it needs to be, so that we don't have these holes in our budget. So those are the two factors that I think we're in a unique. If we're in a stable enrollment, it'd be easy to do a 5-year plan. Because we're in hopefully the end of this long decrease in enrollment phase, any 5-year plan would be kind of weird to put together, because are we assuming that we're going to stay in hold harmless and that's why we're having the override? Are we assuming that we're coming out of hold harmless? The difference in those two scenarios is really significant financially. So it's not easy to predict.
Yep.
Rosemary. Oh, Mike.
Mike,
Sorry.
go ahead.
So I just want to, I have to go back to last week a little bit, and I was on the fence about where to vote when we talked about this. I don't feel like I have enough information, and I've heard it now, everybody has said it, 5-year plan. We received, I don't think, any 5-year plans through the entire budget process. I don't believe in that. You come to me and you say, I need money for this, I don't care if it's computers or pencils, and you don't have a plan, my answer to you is no. That's it. If you can't tell me what we're spending it on, and you have the information behind it, why we're doing this as opposed to other options, what is the best long-term, even though it may be more expensive up front, if you're telling me it's going to save us money, effort, whatever, in the long run, that allows us to have a good conversation and make the right decision in the long term. So I just want to throw that out. That's probably my biggest issue with the whole override, is we're really not in that place. As a town organization, we are really living, paycheck to paycheck.
We did.
Hold on, John. We got Rosemary, and then we got Kathleen, and then we go back.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Well, I want everyone to remember that when you do an override, no matter if you call it a school, you call it anything, it's ultimately a town override. That money doesn't have to be allocated to the school in the next year. So what it ends up doing is making majority vote for the minority needs. And it isolates our working families. And I think I have to say that this shouldn't be happening. This is why we have a school committee. This is why we have a school committee. It also leaves us open to lawsuits for things that aren't met. I'm glad that he's keeping the interventionists. I'm glad that he's keeping the special ed intact, the IEPs intact, because those are the biggest legal things. But this budget is separate because it's the only one we legally have to fund. There's nobody else we legally have to fund. Nobody. This is the only one.
Okay, I'm going to go to Kathleen. I think we're nearing, I think everybody has really chimed in. What I'd like to do after I hear from Kathleen, just kind of give this a general idea, is me hear some, if the board is amenable, hear some final comments. But what I'd like to do is what town meeting is proposing to do, is move the question and take out of order Article 49 for the committee and vote whether or not this committee supports an override. Kathleen.
Rick, could you put me in the queue?
Yes, you're in the queue. There you are. After Kathleen, you're right up.
My comment's going to be, because if this were a normal year, I would be more inclined to tell the schools, you're way over budgeted. This is the first year that they don't have ESSER funds. We saw the importance of federal dollars helping to save schools, among other things. Fire departments, police departments. It was called the Rescue Act. It was a rescue act. And this is the first year that the schools go from a $4 million ESSER 3 allocation to zero. And to go from $4 million to zero, not get any increase in Chapter 70, and still hold pretty much to an intact program for our kids. I think that the school administration, as much as I have some serious criticisms of them, they've done a good job of putting together a budget that will provide for the kids for next year. If this were a common ordinary year where it's just one more year they're asking for way too much money, that I'd be far more sympathetic to having them hold the line. But with the loss of ESSER funds and increases in laws that require I think it's called multi-tiered system of support. So there are some new mandated regulations that require that the schools provide these services. I am willing to go one more year with a compromise that will fully fund the school's assessment with Whitman dollars that are already in the bank someplace, and not ask the taxpayers for an override. Going forward, Sean, I totally agree with you. There has to be a plan going forward that will provide us with a sustainable budget. But this is not the year that I'm willing to say, hey, ESSER is gone, and you've had these other situations hit you that reduces your revenue, because it's a revenue problem, not an expense problem. I think it's the same thing for the town. It's a revenue problem, not an expense problem. We're not asking for the sky, the moon, and the stars. I think even the department heads, Mary Holland in particular, is looking for some janitorial services. I hope she's going to get it. I don't like the look of that face, Mary Beth.
Depends which budget's voted.
I understand. I think that we can come up with a budget. I believe that we can come up with a budget that doesn't involve laying off any people, school people or municipal employees in the different departments, and get through this one more time with a plan not to ask the taxpayers once more for a small override, when down the road, as Rick has said, we're going to need a larger override to sustain the needs going into the middle of the 21st century.
2 seconds.
Go ahead.
We did qualify for a grant for financial trend analysis. So the Community Compact grant will work with us to really begin to develop those trends more deeply, looking back and projecting forward. So that's definitely a priority for us. I don't think, I mean, this is just my interpretation, but I think you should go through Article 2 first and then come back to that question, because to vote on that question without actually knowing like kind of some of the context of Article 2 and how it's affected you both ways.
Well, I think we got a good summary from Mary Beth on what the town is proposing.
I mean, I'm used to your process, and I like your process of systematically going through and looking at, you know, how it's really going to affect the departments. So I think going through Article 2 first to gain some context about how it would be affected if you vote one way or the other could be helpful.
Well, let me just counter that with one quick statement, and it's been brought up that by Justin about the fact that the school budget is also a vote of the town of Hanson, right? I think it's important that we move expeditiously when we make a plan, and just as expeditiously as the town select board moved to have a Teams meeting to put this on the warrant, I think this committee is just as adamant about taking it off. So I think it's helpful if we have the information that we have, but we didn't have time to digest the Article 2 that came in email today, right? This is 1 week beyond where we are supposed to establish our recommendations for all of these articles and on the warrant and all of the numbers in Article 2. That's a pretty good task.
I have a
right?
suggestion.
Hold on. We got one hand up and another hand up, and then. But again, I'm trying to land the plane here too. So.
Yeah, it's a suggestion.
John,
that will solve the
sorry,
problem.
thank you. John, I'm sorry we left you hanging in the queue.
Yes, but I'm not on the plane when it crashes.
Okay. You're in a seat that you have to hold a door, though, just so you know.
If it crashes, we'll crash in your house.
Go ahead, you're up.
Just a couple of points, and I do have a question. I've listened to Dawn, and I listened to Mary Beth, and we have the doomsday proposal as far as the town budget, but we're also hearing that the schools are under the impression that they will also lose a substantial amount of money. And I'm not sure how that process works. The other question I have is, I understand that the selectmen called for the override. If you put that in an article, it's not supposed to go to town meeting for the townspeople to vote up or down to the concept of having a question. You have to have that on the ballot for the election.
Yeah, it is.
So
That's what they voted the other day.
The logic of saying, well, we'll have it as, you know, we'll take it out of order and we'll see what happens as far as what its impact will be on the rest of Article 2. Because you really have to have it there.
Right. You don't need an alternative budget if you don't have an override. Is that what you're saying? Technically.
Yeah.
Right. And we don't really need to have what school committee person is going to want to vote an assessment that they have a percentage of a chance of not getting, right? That's not what they voted. Not in my mind. The school committee voted a 7.87% assessment, and that is what they are needing, right? So it's as easy as that for me. I don't know. Go ahead.
There's a remedy that keeps both the override on the ballot and creates stabilization for increased cost of education that you're concerned about. It's giving them the assessment they have and having the override for the same thing Hanson did in 2020 in their fall for $20,000 after we gave them $500,000 to put in their school stabilization. Our school stabilization account was merged with other accounts in 2020. You can put that in school stabilization. If you want to do the override, you're welcome to do an override, but put that override into the stabilization, not part of this assessment.
Well, it's
That
not
will
the way it's
stabilize.
worded in the warrant article.
You
So
know something? You can amend on town hall floor.
you can. But I think for this purpose of this meeting, and correct me if I'm wrong, are we trying to establish whether or not we're supporting the assessment that the school has presented?
Yes.
Or are we not?
I'm supporting the assessment the school because it has risk, Kathy and Tina had said, but I'm also supporting the need for stabilizing these accounts. But I don't think that we should be undermining the school committee's authority to set their budget. I don't think we should be doing that to create stabilization. If we can manage this budget and just sort of move things around, see what we have at the end of the year, and do another fall meeting, which you're probably going to have to do anyway for the VOTEC, and then do the override for stabilizing any of these concerns. It meets the criteria of the Board of Selectmen to make sure that we can grow if we need to, because that stabilization is there off to the side. We can also control how much we're going to invest over time. So,
What is your proposal? I'm lost.
basically fund the schools and still do the $500,000 override.
That doesn't make any sense.
It absolutely does. It does make sense. We have a school stabilization account. Hanson has money in that stabilization account as well.
Okay.
Ours is called
That's-
something different.
okay, well-
So if they need to do that growth, if they're looking at
I
that
don't get
long
it.
term, I know, but if you think about it, pause on
Okay.
it. You can reject it, but that's.
Let's leave from Mike.
Was John?
So, John, were you done with your question? I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say that I supported the position you had taken, and that's why I voted the way I did last week. And that being that we need an operational override. And I've listened tonight to too much rhetoric about what's wrong with the school budget. And the other issue that I have a real problem with, is talking about, well, this is a short term, and the enrollment's going to stabilize or whatever. But the reality is, you have a proposal that the town needs to accept to put it in, I don't know, 200 units of family housing. It's going to put a whole set of new issues back on the schools. So to say that, hold harmless, we're right around the corner from it. No, drop the talk about the school budget. Realize that it is an operational, everybody's in on this budget problem, and address that.
Good point, John. Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Mike, did you have a question?
More of a suggestion here. I listened to Sean, and I did hear what I interpret as a good suggestion, which is, I don't mind us starting off and looking at, do we support, as a finance committee, do we support or not the override? But I'd like to consider taking that as a straw vote and revisit that same vote after we go through the rest of the articles. So what's our feeling now? Then we look at what other things might we support. Does that change our vote at the end? Again,
Yes,
it's up to you as the chair. Just trying to come up with a way for us to look at that.
That is a possibility. I'm not saying that that's not a good scenario to take. However, I think we know what's in the Article 2. We've looked at it for, quite a long time. There are some subtle changes. There are some layoffs that, weren't part of that before. There's changes, right?
Well,
Mary Beth went over the changes.
I'm referring to the rest of the articles. What other things are in there? Because there's a few that I'm definitely on the fence about whether I would support.
But I guess I'm just questioning how that is going to affect your opinion of an override.
Is there money that I would not say that we need to spend right now that could be used that would change the amount we're either going to look to override or potentially wipe out that override?
Right.
Right. It's a fluid question we have right now. If we spend money here, then the override becomes more necessary. If we elect not to spend money on this, then maybe it's less or no override. That's the challenge, and I appreciate where Mary.
Right. I definitely appreciate the comments that everybody's made, but here's my thought, right?
Yep.
And I think what we need to do is have a further conversation with the Board of Selectmen on what's in Article 2.
Okay.
But the only way we're going to get there is to establish whether or not we support this.
Which is why I said it would definitely.
It's almost like the cart before the horse, right?
Yep, okay.
Because once we move forward with this process and we start voting warrant articles, we've lost the opportunity to make the point that the assessment is the assessment, in my mind, right? I mean,
Agreed.
once we decide not to move forward in that direction, then we start looking at warrant articles and how we can change them. Perhaps we won't have to use any one-time money. Perhaps we can find other things in the budget that, Mary Beth hasn't considered about what's in the best interest of the long-term approach for this budget, right? So, certain staffing that's maybe, not filled right now, do we wait? Do we hold off on that? Do we pull back from the funding on, someone that's not in position right now? Until we can make an assessment of what our long-term assets are, right? Our levy capacity.
Understood.
Rosemary.
Okay, I suggested something, I didn't describe it well enough. Ultimately, we are recognizing that it would be dangerous to risk or gamble this override on only children, on a vulnerable population, right? We've recognized that, at least it seems in the school committee. in this committee. And our Board of Selectmen have said this is unsustainable. My suggestion was, don't make the risk on children, right? If you think that this will pass, then it will pass for stabilization, school stabilization, just as well as it would pass for cutting this year. So if you think your override will pass, make it pass for school stabilization. That way it handles your long-term issue that you have a problem with. We just start it up next year opposed to this year. That is my suggestion. My suggestion handles both aspects. Other than that, then it's almost an admission that you know that it won't pass. And everybody kind of knows it won't pass. But I don't want to risk children on that gamble.
Okay, thank you for your point. Mary Beth.
That can't be done because the language for the ballot question has to be into the clerk 35 days ahead. We've already missed that deadline. That cannot be changed. So that's not an option to do that. Plus, then the town would be taking additional funds.
Right, it's not on the ballot. We all know what,
No,
if we're not putting something on the ballot that should be on the ballot, what the ramifications of that are,
The
right?
language can't be amended on town hall floor?
For a ballot question, absolutely not. The way it's voted must be presented.
I can't put that risk on children.
Okay, Sean.
Mike, are you familiar with the difference between one-time funds and recurring revenue? Okay, so the budget that Mary Beth primarily put together that she's presenting to you tonight does not use one-time funds in our operating budget.
Understood.
So pulling back on certain articles to find money to then use that money to pay for the operating budget is not a financial practice that you want to embrace. So we've done that in the past, but we're trying to deliberately step away from that. So we're deliberately putting together a plan. We've worked with Hanson and the school committee to develop a plan that will help us move forward in a sustainable way. So that's for the finance committee point of view, I think that's the lens that I hope you kind of look at this. Is this the plan that's put together, is this going to help us move forward in a sustainable way? And I think if you look through that lens, I think you'll find it's a step in that direction.
Right. The reason I brought it up is that there are a lot of articles that are pulling from free cash. That's a one-time. That's not a recurring.
Exactly.
So the money is there. That's why I brought up the
We
thought
wouldn't want
process.
to use one-time funds like free cash for the operating.
Understood.
Right.
But again, we're talking options that we have. There's want to do it, but then potentially have to do it sometimes. But I agree with you.
But
Conceptually, we don't
the
want to do
finance
that.
committee primarily would look through.
Overriding this.
I hope that you're looking through a financial lens that, you're making a recommendation based on your financial
Yes.
intelligence and background. And we're trying to present a budget. We're proud of the budget that we're presenting as being a financially stable budget. A step in that direction.
Okay, and then just into context about lenses, right? We're talking about the lesser of two evils in this scenario is if we overlook the short-term benefits of this override and look at the long-term benefits of waiting until Mary Beth can develop a long-term sustainable budget operational override. I think that's the taxpayers, and this is the end of the day. What we're trying to vote on here is what the taxpayers want to do. Whether or not I agree with it, or Mary Beth agrees with it, or Mike agrees with it, pretty irrelevant. We're trying to forecast what is in the minds of the taxpayers. And again, they're just as in need of information as we are. So I have to just say that this isn't a one-size-fits-all remedy, right? I think we have to look at the pros and cons of every scenario where we have. Rosemary.
I just want to include that there are things in free cash or that come in, that go into free cash, that aren't one-time monies, that are consistent every year, like UGA or whatever. But also things that going into free cash are also monies coming out of budgets that they didn't spend. So you can pad a budget and then make it go in. So it's just a delayed amount. And if you start seeing a trend of your free cash pretty consistently, you're kind of seeing that maybe in your town budget, if we're having that much free cash. So that's not really a one-time thing, although I would agree you want to make that streamlined, you want to do that. And another thing is, if we're looking at revenues, one thing I'm not seeing on this is the Municipal Relief Act allows us to increase our food tax, our amounts that we, meals tax. I don't see that in there. Is that something we're
The
considering?
Municipal Empowerment Act, that has not been voted yet. That has been filed, but it has not been voted. So nothing can be done until that is done.
That is about to be, that'll be done
Not
this
yet,
year.
right.
Yes.
So nothing
is
can
that
be done.
something being considered to do?
So if we look at, things that we can look on the horizon, that's
So,
one of them,
like
but
say
not this
potentially
year.
on the fall town meeting.
Depends on when it's signed and what's in it, and we go from there.
All right,
We'll
we're gonna-
see what's been
I think,
filed.
John, did you had mentioned something about it. Do you have any information about it?
Go ahead, Don. Thank you.
I wanted to ask about the free cash, but I will say Hanson, Board of Selectmen, I watched their meeting. They have put it on their warrant article for a town meeting, subject to when it gets approved, they are bumping it up from the 0.75 to the 1% on meals tax. So they're proactively taking that. Free cash, my question is, and you don't have to entertain this if it goes off the rails, but if there's no free cash being used to fund the municipal town budget for FY25, what was the situation where last year I sat in that joint meeting with both Board of Selectmen and School Committee, and the town of Whitman did use free cash last year, as well as the schools, and the district is using free cash this year one time to fund our recurring, so we would love to not need to do that, but we have agreed to. So now I'm hearing the town doesn't need to, and I'm putting that in quotes this year, so I'd like to understand if that's
Right.
possible.
Well,
How
that-
that
Different
was
rules for
remedied
town,
from last
yeah.
year using one time, and now the revenue is there?
Right, so and we proposed this last week. We looked at the list of capital items. There's $770,000 of capital expenditures that the capital committee has recommended for this warrant. But there's not funding for $770,000. In my mind, the money is a compromise in much the same way as the E&D funds that were used by the schools as part of a compromise. I think it's our responsibility to do a negotiation. When we propose a negotiation with the schools, whether it be by a subcommittee meeting, in town hall with representatives from the Board of Selectmen or the town administrator and the school committee chair and the superintendent, or we're having a collective meeting with the boards and the finance committees, we still have to negotiate at the end of the day. It's about what we're going to put in and what the other side is going to put in. That's, to me, how we get beyond an impasse. And to me, we need to do our part. And our part includes finding the money within one-time funds, and that is free cash. We talked about it last week. So, yes, is that the best responsible way for a finance committee to move forward? No, but in this scenario, it's the lesser of the two evils in my mind. Sean?
I think, in my opinion, you should make recommendations on what's financially prudent. Period. So I hope that you do that. I think it would also be helpful for Mary Beth to describe the procedure a little bit more, to give you a little bit more context, because I still think there's some confusion, and even it's good for me to hear it again. Like, if the initial question is proposed and it's supported, how we move forward in Article 2, versus if the initial question is proposed and it's not supported by town meeting, then how we move forward, and then how the school committee also plays a role in that. As far as, is it an official assessment that's accepted as in town meeting floor, or does it automatically get sent back to the school committee?
Okay, so the way that we're putting this forth is to fund the 5% and the balance of what the school is looking for contingent upon an override. If that override article passes, it's still considered, and if it passes at the ballot, it's still considered a rejected budget. However, the schools can just say the two pieces make up the total, so they'll accept it because that's the number that they want, and they got it between an override and on the floor. If it passes on the floor to go to the ballot and it fails, it's considered a rejected budget and it goes back to the school. If the article itself doesn't pass to go forward to the ballot, you can't stop the question. It's already gone out to the printer. It will appear. It would just have no meaning.
Impact, right.
No matter what people voted, it's a dead article, a dead ballot question. And then at that point on the floor, we would need to, in order to have a balanced budget, look to the dual column that we have here and to hopefully vote the recommendations based on the secondary budget.
Yeah, so we come up with the secondary budget.
So the secondary budget
Charts as
assumes
well.
the 7.87%. Is that correct?
It assumes that the override question fails at town meeting.
So this is really the most important part in my mind. Why, if you're interested in having it fail, should we put it on the ballot at all? Why should we put it in the warrant? If the effort to put it on the ballot is in the hope it fails, why are we putting on a ballot? Why would the school committee vote their assessment? It's like putting their assets on red or black. The assessment is the assessment, right? Why would you gamble? Why would you gamble and lose?
Yeah. Why would you say hope it fails? Who wants to hope it fails?
This is not the process. This is not the process. The process is if you want that other budget, you go on the town hall floor and you advocate for it. You amend it. You do whatever, and it goes back.
You just don't accept the budget.
You don't accept it. And why are we having this added expense of an override and all this theater when there is a process? Because it has to. All it is circumventing the sovereignty of the school committee. That's all it does, and we shouldn't need an override for it.
Right. It's almost 9
It's a
o'clock.
process.
I'm going to have to think that we're going to end this conversation. Is the finance committee ready to vote this article? Or do you want to table it to look at Article 2? What's the general consensus?
I'm ready to vote.
I'm ready to vote.
John?
You can't change it to
I
stabilization.
still have a question.
Okay.
Having researched the state government discussion on this subject, and they're basically saying the selectmen decide whether there should be an override.
That's correct.
Yeah.
It makes no sense to me that you put it before the townspeople and they can vote to say, no, we don't want going forward to a ballot question. And you already have the ballot question, but you're saying
It won't have any meaning.
town
It won't have-
meeting
it's a
votes
false
it
choice.
down, it won't have any impact.
Right. It won't.
But I don't think that's legal.
It's not. It's gray areas of the law.
So perhaps it's
It is
great,
legal.
John, right?
It's very
But
gray area.
I like to think that we have town council that's, getting us through this process to this point. So, however, like I said, I think it's important that this committee take a vote, and before we entertain, I'm hopeful, this is what I'm hopeful for, that the Board of Selectmen will then reanalyze the recommendations that Mary Beth has put forth in that Article 2 to include one-time money to get us through till we can do an operational override and address the long-term needs of the town. I think this is the scenario, right? We're telling them that this isn't the way forward, right? I hope that we could have a further discussion about what the recommendations would be if in fact we weren't even considering this red or black scenario for the school committee, in my mind.
Yeah.
I'm gonna let go one more time.
Okay. John, this is legal. We've done it before, 2016 for fiscal 2017. We had the similar article and the ballot question, and that has all been reviewed by council. I just want to let you know, too, the agenda's going out for the Board of Selectmen's meeting this Thursday for the 23rd, and the 23rd, they will vote on Article 2 and the warrant, so.
As we have it before us.
Yeah, I don't accept that it's legal, and I don't accept that
Okay.
you tell me. I'd rather talk directly and have specific questions.
All right.
And hold on, because we have seen illegal action. The assessment was illegal. When they broke it out and it wasn't put forward to the taxpayer, and $4.5 million, or $4 million diverted, that was not legal.
Okay, so that's a good example.
I would.
But it really
that's
doesn't
not an
germane
end-all
to the
be-all for
question,
me.
right? I think we want to move forward with the question. I think I just personally want to thank the Board of Selectmen, Mary Beth, for the work that you've done again by coming in tonight. You obviously are supportive of this ballot initiative to have an override on the ballot. It's been very clear, and the work that you put in can't be understated.
Thank you.
Okay. So, if anybody doesn't have any other questions for Mary, we got one question.
It's not even a question, it's just a good statement. And as a taxpayer, not really knowing a lot of everything, I just want to say that points from every single direction were very clear, very good to hear. I have a little bit more of an outlook of how it's all working, and I hope people listen to this recording so they understand where the Board of Selectmen are coming from, where the town administrator is coming from, and where the finance committee is coming from. And it's good to hear it all. All the points were great.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I just wanted to add one thing. The decorum tonight, I think it was exemplary, and I appreciate everybody taking the time to be respectful with their opinions to everyone else. I think that made a big difference. Okay, so you're free to go. Thank you again for coming, you guys. Really, sincerely.
Have a good night.
Thank you. All right, good night.
Have a good night, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
So, like I said, I respectful to Mike's points. I just think that it's going to be difficult for us to move forward in Article 2 if we don't have a clear idea of where we're going with an override. I just think, if you think about the dynamics of it, and here's the other point too, is we could reconsider. If we vote Article 49 one way, there's nothing that says we can't reconsider. It's still going to be on the warrant, right? That's not a precedent, right? We have reconsidered articles before.
Can I read that right here?
I'm going to read it out loud. Okay. You ready?
That's pretty much what I was saying.
Yeah.
I want that ability.
This won't be
to
the
take a
last
step back with
pass,
it.
right? But to me, I think it's important to Hanson to understand that the Whitman Finance Committee is not in agreement with this approach to long-term financing. So I'm not certainly, trying to advise them on how they should proceed. But I think by having a $500,000 override and then immediately after a long-term financial operational override, it's not going to work. It's just not going to work. So I'm going to read the article. Article 49. To see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate outside the levy limit of Proposition 2.5, so-called, $509,212 to be added to Article 2, Budget Line 21, the Whitman-Hanson Regional School District operating expense, voted this date, thereby approving the district's submitted budget for fiscal 25, provided that this additional appropriation shall be contingent on the approval of a Proposition 2.5 levy limit override under General Laws, Chapter 59, Section 21C, Paragraph G, proposed by the Board of Selectmen, and then Finance Committee voted to our vote. So, that's the article. So, do I have a motion?
Can I ask a question first?
Yes.
Can I move the question and then vote no? Because the way this is
It's always worded the reverse.
It doesn't lead for us to say vote yes if you don't want it to pass. So I think I will move Article 49 so that I can vote no, not to recommend it.
Right, but I guess semantically, right, if I ask for a recommendation, all right, the recommendation really has to be in the affirmative. And then 0 to 8 or 1 to 7 is an appropriate rejection of the article.
So you're answering, I'm not being clear.
Yeah.
Mike, this article needs to be moved, and then to oppose this article, we need to vote no.
To oppose the article, we need to vote no. Right.
The Finance Committee voted X
0,
to
0
Y.
to recommend, right? So
if you're not recommending.
So if you're not recommending, you're in the second column, right?
I'm voting no.
Right.
There I go. Thank you for
What are you
clarifying.
voting, Kathy?
I'm voting no.
All right, so we have a motion for the,
So I
to vote
move-
no on the override for the schools. You want to put it as simply as that, or Article 49?
If that's an appropriate motion, then I will, I move that we vote no on Article 49,
Okay.
but that means we have to vote no. No, I will move Article 49.
Right.
The way it is phrased.
Yes, I think that's a better way to go.
And, as an aside, not part of my motion, I will be voting no.
Okay.
So, for the purposes of
Understandable.
discussion, I
Confusing
am
us all
moving,
now.
If you feel the same way she does,
I
follow
am
along.
moving Article
Wait.
49.
All right, is there anybody that's confused that when I ask for a motion to recommend, if you don't say yes, then you're voting no? Is anybody not
Confused
understanding?
about what, Rick, at this point?
We are voting Article. Oh, okay.
How are we voting?
No.
I'm voting no, to not to recommend.
Okay, so we're gonna start with Kathleen because she knows what she's gonna do.
I'm voting no.
Okay, Kathleen, no. Rosemary.
Did you get a second?
Second, I second.
Okay, we motion and second. Is there further discussion before we move to a vote?
Yes.
Mike.
One quick question is, as I'm listening to it, it sounds like that they are restricting the use of any override funds solely for the use of making up the difference in the school.
Correct.
Essentially.
So they cannot use it for anything else.
No, going forward, they can use it for whatever.
But after.
But this article, this year, that is what it's earmarked for. They cannot use it for anything
So
else.
next year they can.
Well, understood that this is a permanent change to our tax
So
levy.
they're almost committing to invest in the school.
It's a permanent assessment to the tax levy, but the direction of the funds following the first year is undecided.
Understood, yes. But this first year, they are holding their feet to the fire.
Yes.
They can't just get this and then say, you know what, I'm going to buy a carnival and put it in.
Yeah. But again,
But hold on, because once the schools do have the money, then it's the school's money.
No, it goes
Every
away.
year, it's a new budget.
It's a new budget.
It's a new budget, yeah.
It's a way to.
that's why it's a Band-Aid approach. It's a Band-Aid approach because it's a 1 year.
And then next year, all the others.
Just want to make sure that I
Pull
understood.
that same money and we'll.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. all
Unless we
right?
do it to stabilization.
All right.
Is there any further discussion?
Yes, there is.
Well, go ahead.
Can I ask a question? Because I don't have the document in front of me that you do, and it sounded like the article said to add 509,000 to line 21. Can you tell me what the amount is on line 21?
$18,626,475.
This is where, in my impression of regional school finance, this doesn't hold water because you're supposed to vote one number. On what is the social vocational assessment? It's one number. Norfolk Agricultural is one number. Bristol Agricultural is one number. But the way it's being presented is two
Yeah.
separate numbers.
Well,
I don't
more
believe
than
that's in
that.
line
Yeah.
with the law.
here's the problem too, Don, and your point is well taken, but we haven't voted any number on that article budget line yet in this process. Say the town meeting takes this out of order. They're going to take Article 49 first. There is no number there. Nobody has voted anything yet. So in my mind, they're going to have to take Article 2, budget line 21 out of order first, and then go to supplement the line with this warrant article.
Yeah.
Right? Does that make sense to you?
If this assessment from the regional school district that we moved pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 71, Section 16B, at $19,135,687, isn't the number voted at town meeting, and I don't know what else is valid.
Nothing's valid.
Yeah, so like I said.
That's my discussion. Feel free to
Yeah.
continue with your vote.
So apparently, like I said, it's going to have to vote Article 2, budget line first, budget line 21 first, and then in the aggregate sum, it would equal that. But is that legal? That is to be determined, right? So, good point. So, here we are, we have a motion and a second. Are we done with discussion?
No.
Please.
Can you look at that?
Go.
It's very
Go.
bad, and we've had that discussion.
Go ahead, Rosemary.
And an apology, quick.
Sorry, I'm very sorry.
Thank you. No, we are done, because all this does, by just isolating that, $500,000 or so, is put it towards one demographic, one group, and we're supposed to be considering everyone. The school budget isn't excessive. It's an arbitrary number that isn't, I couldn't find, somebody's going to point out where the Madden report after reviewing it. Tell me the page.
Never says 5%.
Tell me the page. So it's an arbitrary number that they've isolated. It's a similar number that they pulled back from the levy. And it says it right in the article last year. We're going to take it back from taxations. We're going to fill it in with the prior year's amount in free cash. So this money could have been in our levy if we didn't do that Article 42. So it's the same amount that we suddenly cannot pay for one demographic. So I will not support the majority to vote being isolated, to isolate out for the minority. It's unethical.
Okay, thank you for your additional comments. Anybody else? Okay, are we ready to move to vote? Kathleen?
No.
Rosemary?
No.
Al?
No.
Chuck?
No.
John?
No.
Ralph?
No.
Mike?
I'll go with no.
And I vote no. Okay, so recording that's 8-0-0.
0 to
Zero.
8 to recommend.
0 to 8.
The way it reads
I know.
is Finance Committee
Sorry.
voted 0 to 8 to
Yep.
recommend.
Yes, 0 to 8 to recommend. Sorry, 0 to 8.
It's unbelievable the wording, isn't it?
It's tough.
0 to 8, not to recommend it.
No,
No.
the way that the motion
0
was
voted to
made,
recommend, 8 did
8
not.
voted against to recommend.
Oh, yeah.
It's backwards asked.
But actually, now when they write it up in the warrant article as presented at town meeting, they will probably write voted 0 to 8 to not recommend.
You never know, right?
Use
Yeah.
that word.
I think it's going to be pretty clear by town meeting that the finance committee is not in support of this article, and I think for the valid reasons that were presented tonight. So, I really don't want to go into any part of Article 2 that anybody has not had a chance to look at. Does everybody know where it is in the email? Can you
It
explain?
came way too late to.
Oh, yeah.
I
Yeah.
resent
Kathy,
it.
you sent it to my email,
I believe I
like-
resent it.
I can't.
Did you send it as an individual thing, or is it a tab at the bottom of the page?
Can somebody, you know what, I should be able to check, because I should.
Can you
I
check?
have it right here, I just don't have paper long enough.
You don't have the 1117 or whatever,
I
right?
have the updated
'Cause I was gonna say,
All right, so what we'll have
could we
is,
get some of that printed?
we'll have printed
Yeah,
copies
Kathy,
available at the next
your
meeting.
version of the updated budget.
Okay.
It has,
I'll put that on my list.
Would have been
it
nice to
has
have
some
printed
color
copies tonight.
coding.
It
on
really
the
would have
card.
been nice to have printed copies tonight, yeah.
Right. I don't have the
So,
article.
Elizabeth's
It's
fault.
going to be the easiest thing to print.
FY20.
I'll bring one to your house.
How about my house?
I have district
I got it.
budget.
Oh, you got it?
I'm looking at it.
It was
Yeah,
sent,
that's
okay.
All right, so I guess it's out there. John can see it.
It was sent 9 minutes
Which
before
looks
the meeting.
good on a
9 minutes before the meeting is not enough time
Not
to
really
review.
written article as
into a
opposed to
printed
budget.
copy
I have the
very
budget.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right,
Because it's too wide.
right. So it's a special paper that we got to print it on. So, like I said, if you're happy with your electronic version,
This tab.
I'll print copies. Huh? You are
I'm happy.
okay.
I haven't
If
checked.
you're happy, I'm happy.
I haven't checked.
For the first time all evening, yes, I'm happy.
And there's
All
still a
right.
mistake here, because technology.
All right.
You saw that, huh?
Can we?
Yeah.
You should know better than
We
that.
didn't-
Wait a minute. We have multiple conversations going here.
These
Please.
two are, you're gonna get
Kathleen,
a glass of
Michael.
wine.
So rude.
Well, you get a spreadsheet up, we just go crazy,
Chairman.
so.
I hate it when people do it, I'm very sorry.
All right, sorry, John, there's a sidebar discussion about spreadsheets. So, I think that we don't have any other information. We could start voting warrant articles, but I think at this hour, it's not going to be very effective. Because I really think we should look at the warrant articles in the context of the Article 2. Because you have to keep in mind, that if we're going to advocate for using one-time funds, free cash, then we have to decide that the prioritized capital articles have to be winnowed down, I would say.
Or
We're not going to be laying off 3 firefighters, in my mind. I mean,
No.
that works
We're going to
great.
preserve core services.
Yeah. So I think, and then my hope is that the Board of Selectmen will come up with an alternative recommendation, but I think it's up to us to make an Article 2 that represents what the town really needs. Rosemary, then Mike.
Okay, our job is to provide both the budget and a contingency budget under the terms of override and an override feeling. That
Right.
is our job as finance.
That is our job. It is always nice
I
to
don't know what
have,
that secondary thing is, but it's unusual to most budgets.
It is.
Most finance committees do not do that.
and typically what we are provided with is a balanced budget associated with the numbers from the school assessment. So we have everything we need, right? But I think we need to, we don't really have a lot of time to digest it, to be perfectly honest with you.
it's
And
more
then,
than 3 hours.
yeah,
Yeah.
so, Mike.
Just a point, as I've thought about this a lot, is you use the term core services. We have to maybe rethink what core services are.
Okay.
We're not the city of Boston or city of New York. We have a limited number of people. We're a small town, and its potential. We've been adding things which are nice. They're wonderful to have, but they may be outside of our reach, and that's
Yes.
something as we go through this. I think we all have to kind of look at it. We call it, needs, wants, wishes lists.
Yep.
Yep.
So how we'll be addressing the Article 2 is the same way they do it at town meeting. We'll go page by page.
Yep.
We'll question articles. So if you feel that there's something in Article 2 in a budget line that you feel is excessive or you feel is not adequate, then you question the line and we have a discussion. So Mike, point well taken. You have to realize that COVID money has been used for the relief of other town departments as well as our districts. And so perhaps there is some room there to go back.
Mike made a really good point earlier, and I don't know if anybody's seen it, but
Did?
I know
Well,
one.
thank you.
You're
That's
welcome.
it. I can go
And that's
home
all
now.
I'm going to leave it right there. No, it was the rate in which we increase. Like, oh, we have all these and we have this problem, but it's the rate in which we're increasing. So we were supposed to do an override. That's true, and instead we put. We didn't examine the operating budget. We didn't examine the wants, the needs, and where we were going and design it. We rushed in and did 2 buildings at once, and we're waiting for a vocational building.
Absolutely.
And now we're looking at an override, for this mini
Taxpayer.
override, and then another override. Well, why don't we look at the rate that we're increasing taxation and per income? So taxation to income is one of the sections on the DOR. So we should be looking at that and saying, can this be an adjustment most seniors can do? Luckily, we have a few articles in the warrant that allow for the offset of those increases on senior citizens. I think they're packed it. But remember, those offsets then fall back on the other taxes.
Rest of
Rest of the taxpayers. So that's going to be added into that,
Yeah.
So we're going to
All
really
right.
look at average.
All right.
Good point.
taxation.
Good point. Anybody else? Any general ideas? Okay.
Move to adjourn.
One question.
John, hold
John's
on.
got a point.
Go ahead. Go ahead, John, you're up.
Okay, we know that 3 police officers and 3 firefighters are cut in the current proposed budget. Do we have an understanding of what else is in line to be cut?
Yes.
Well, I think it's
Their
important.
choice. That's not our choice.
We're gonna see on the Excel spreadsheet
Yeah.
the reds all marked clearly. But are we going to know when we sit down to start this on Thursday what the red actually represents?
Well, I think the red, if you're looking at it cutting a position, the red includes what it will cost to pay workers the unemployment costs associated with losing an individual. Because you have to realize that the dollar amount for that individual isn't how much is cut. You have to pay the unemployment benefits for that individual too. So it's not, $100,000 person isn't gonna save 100,000, so, something to keep in mind.
40% less, so you're better to cut a high-paid person than a lower-paid person.
Hopefully they'll go to another job.
Yeah,
Right.
multiple lower-paid people,
Well, I think that none of the discussion about laying off positions is
I'm not
to be
laying it.
taken lightly,
This is funded. I mean, essentially, John, we'll determine where the money goes, and then they'll have to figure out what they do with that money. So if you don't want firefighters cut off, well, then don't touch their line.
So here's another possibility, John, too, is that we look at the consolidated budget and we let the departments make their cuts the way they think they should make their cuts. So, for instance, instead of saying, we're taking this out of salaries, we're going to take it out of, we either have to take it out of salaries or an expense line, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's up to the department how those cuts are going to be implemented, if in fact they pass town meeting, right? So I think we're going to be looking at the consolidated numbers instead of, we're going to go through the process of looking at the line items, but I think at the end of the day, we're going to tally up and look at percentages of the consolidated budget for reduction to meet this $509,000 goal, right? Is that clear to everybody? I mean,
Yeah, we're looking at Article 2, and we're also looking at the capital requests and the funding sources available that we haven't even discussed, like capital stabilization, general stabilization, and free cash.
Right.
Those are three significant sources of money that will not impact the taxpayer if
Right.
we choose to fund virtually everything that's on the table. Nobody gets laid off, not town side, not school side, and taxpayers are not asked to pay another $95
right.
for a Band-Aid.
It is a Band-Aid. Okay. Very good.
$95 a
If there's no other business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
We got a motion and a second. I can't discuss this one. We're
Nope.
gonna go to a voice vote. We're gonna start with you, John.
Can't discuss this.
Yes.
Ralph.
Yes.
Mike.
Yes.
Kathleen.
Yes.
Rosemary. Al.
Yes.
Chuck.
Yep.
And I go yes. Thank you all for enduring, and Dawn, thank you for coming.